Chapter 443. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu, Sonian Literature Network. The middle-aged man's wife poked him in the forehead with her finger angrily. Do you think my nephew is as useless as you? Is there anything he doesn't know? As she said this, she turned her face and forced a smile at Zhang Tsuni with a sad face. I've let you see a joke. Tsuni, you're so capable. Do you have any way to deal with these shameless B***stards? At least get my man's money back. Zhang Tsuni pondered for a moment and didn't answer immediately. A boy next to him gently touched his arm and winked at him. Zhang Tsuni understood and walked aside with him. The boy asked in a low voice, Boss, could this dissection be the one opened by Li Yundong? Zhang Tsuni nodded. It should be. The boy opened his mouth wide. Then this Li Yundong, who opened a tea house and had half of the provincial leaders go to support him, could it be the Li Yundong who fought with you at the Fox Zen School in Mount Tianlong? A cold light flashed in Zhang Tsuni's eyes. He snorted and said, It's probably the same person. Only he has a group of lawless fox spirits under his command. This kind of thing can only be done by a group of fox spirits who bring disaster to the country and the people. Humph, I don't know how Li Yundong is the leader of the sect. How does he control his disciples? He knows that they are fox spirits, but he still releases them to harm the world. A trace of anger flashed across his face, and he said in a deep voice, I've only heard people say that the Fox Zen School harms the world, but I've never seen a real example. I didn't expect to run into them this time. Li Yundong can't control these fox spirits. I'll help him. The boy next to Zhang Tsuni whispered, Boss, are we really going to take care of them? Zhang Tsuni said without hesitation, Yes, of course. Otherwise, why would we learn this cultivation kung fu? The boy said cautiously, But, boss, we are no match for Li Yundong. Last time. A trace of dissatisfaction flashed in Zhang Tsuni's eyes. He snorted and said, I'll go back to my father and ask him to give me the Sanhuang sword. Humph, in the past, he was afraid that I would use this sword to run amok. This time, I will use this sword to slay demons and enforce justice on behalf of heaven. He won't care about me, right? I don't believe that I will lose to Li Yundong with the Sanhuang sword in my hand. The boy was overjoyed. Well, then our Qingqing sect will have a better chance of winning the Taoist assembly this time. At the same time, almost at the same time, Li Yundong, who had already flown to Dongwu City, had no idea that Su Chan and the little foxes had caused a big trouble. He followed the business card that Du Fei had given him and found the location of the Chuanjian Dragon Sex Company, Longmen Building, Dongwu City Park. Li Yundong came to the building and looked up. He saw that the building was about 20 floors high. It had a unique shape and an extraordinary style. The two magnificent characters, Dragon Gate, at the top were particularly eye-catching. Li Yundong sighed in his heart. No wonder it's the second largest Taoist sect. It actually has such a magnificent building in the busy city where every inch of land is worth an inch of gold. Amazing! As soon as he entered the building, Li Yundong saw that the reception hall was magnificently decorated. The giant chandelier above his head was bright and gorgeous, like an upside-down galaxy, dazzling people. Under his feet was a layer of glass panels hanging high, and under the glass panels was full of mist, making people feel like they were stepping on clouds and stepping into a fairyland. Li Yundong clicked his tongue in wonder as he walked inside. After a few steps, he heard a noise near the front desk of the hall. 3 women in gorgeous clothes were surrounding the front desk lady and shouting, You're busy again. Are you kidding me? The last time we came here, you said you wanted to make an appointment. When I asked about the appointment, you told me that it was already next month. Well, then I'll come back next month. Now it's the month after next, right? You actually told me to come back next month. Hey, you can't fool people like this, can you? Where's Du Fei? Ask him to come out. I think he doesn't have the ability and doesn't dare to take our business. The front desk lady was surrounded by these women. There was a trace of disdain in her eyes, but she still wore a polite and respectful smile on her face. She said, Mrs. Li, Mrs. Ma, Mrs. Sun, we didn't mean to fool you, but the appointment is really full. It's already next month. Mr. Du is not free, and we can't do anything about it. Li Yundong looked over and saw that Mrs. Li, who was wearing a mink coat, was obviously the leader. She was about 37 or 38 years old, but because of her good maintenance, she looked like she was 27 or 28 years old. Although her body was tightly wrapped in the mink coat, it could still be seen that she was exquisite. Among the three women, she looked the youngest, had the loudest voice, and was the most willing to go all out. Mrs. Li shouted, I don't care. Let me see the appointments. I don't believe that you can push me to the next month after coming here twice in a row. Are there so many people? The front desk lady smiled and said, I'm sorry, Mrs. Li. We have a rule that we can't disclose Mr. Du's appointment. This is his personal privacy. Mrs. Li was so angry that her voice was so loud that everyone in the hall looked at her. What can't be disclosed? I think you are playing with us. We came all the way from Tiannan City to Dongwu City because of his reputation. Is this how Du Fei treats us? Do you know who I am? The front desk lady smiled reservedly and said, I know. You are the fourth concubine of Shen Wankai, the chairman and president of the Wankai Group. Mrs. Li, am I right? Li Yundong almost burst out laughing when he heard this. It turned out that she was an acquaintance. Shen Wansai's fourth concubine. Mrs. Li. What was going on? Since she was Shen Wansai's wife, why was she Mrs. Li? Li Yundong thought about it for a while, but soon understood. Oh, the fourth concubine has no identity, so she can't call me Mrs. Shen like the first wife, so she can only call me Mrs. Li. Understanding this, Li Yundong smiled and thought to himself, you can't be so sarcastic, can you? This front desk lady has a good mouth. Amazing. The title of Mrs. Li was obviously the shortcoming of Shen Wansai's fourth concubine. It was fine if someone called her that, but she didn't expect that she would be humiliated by a front desk lady when she was used to domineering at home. Mrs. Li's heart suddenly became angry, and she became bold. She was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She pointed at the front desk lady and said in a trembling voice, You, what did you say? I want to see your boss, Du Fei. I want to complain about you. The front desk lady's expression did not change. She still smiled reservedly and said, Mrs. Li, if you want to complain about me, of course I welcome you, but if you want to find Mr. Du to complain about me, you have to make an appointment in advance. Mrs. Li's voice suddenly rose an octave. You need to make an appointment to complain? The front desk lady smiled politely and said, Yes, the appointment has already been booked until next month. Li Yundong finally couldn't help but laugh out loud when he heard this. His laughter immediately attracted Mrs. Li and the others to look at him unkindly. Mrs. Li shouted at Li Yundong angrily, What are you laughing at? Who are you? Li Yundong held back his smile, straightened his face, and said seriously, My surname is Li, hello, Mrs. Li. As soon as he said this, it was equivalent to taking advantage of the rich lady. The front desk lady couldn't help but burst out laughing. The two women beside Mrs. Li also couldn't help smiling, but they quickly held back their laughter. Mrs. Sun helped to scold him, What nonsense are you talking about? You can't make such a joke. Li Yundong looked aggrieved. I'm not talking nonsense. My surname is Li. After that, he smiled at Mrs. Li and said, Mrs. Li, don't you think so? The front desk lady couldn't help laughing. She covered her mouth and turned her head to hide her laughter. Mrs. Li was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She pointed at Li Yundong and said angrily, You little bastard, who do you think you are? How dare you humiliate me like this? You wait. As she said this, she pointed at the front desk lady and said, and you wait too. Mrs. Lee took out a mobile phone from her small bag and dialed a number with trembling hands. As she dialed, she cursed, well, you have guts. Remember this. The front desk lady glanced at Mrs. Lee with deep contempt in her eyes. She turned to Li Yundong and said with a smile, Mr. Lee, what can I do for you? Li Yundong laughed and said, I'm looking for Du Fei. Mrs. Lee, who was waiting for the call, suddenly sneered and interrupted, you need to make an appointment. Even I can't see him, let alone you. The front desk lady ignored her and asked with the same smile, is this Du Fei, Mr. Du? Do you have an appointment? Li Yundong smiled and shook his head. No. The front desk lady smiled apologetically. I'm sorry, Mr. Lee, I can't let you see Mr. Du without an appointment. Why don't you register and I'll help you make an appointment? Mrs. Lee interrupted abruptly, it's already the month after next. Li Yundong glanced at her and shook his head with a smile. He said to the front desk lady, it's so troublesome to see Du Fei. Next time this guy comes to see me, I'll also make an appointment for him and ask him to come again next month. Mrs. Lee, who was standing to one side, saw that Li Yundong's tone was very arrogant. It was almost impossible for ordinary people to see Du Fei, but Li Yundong seemed to be talking about meeting a roadside vendor. He was giving Du Fei face. Mrs. Lee couldn't help but sneer. You. Why don't you take a piss and look at yourself? Who are you? Li Yundong turned his face and said politely with a smile, I'm Li Yundong, Mrs. Lee, nice to meet you. Mrs. Lee didn't expect that she would be taken advantage of by this guy again. She was so angry that she rolled her eyes and almost fainted. At this time, the front desk lady suddenly stared at Li Yundong and asked tentatively, Mr. Lee, what did you say your name was? Li Yundong. Li Yundong smiled and said, well, I'm Li Yundong from the East. The front desk lady suddenly became excited. She walked out from the front desk and magically took out a book and a pen from behind her. She said with a smile, are you the famous Shinran Li? Oh, I've heard a lot about you. I was wondering why you looked so familiar just now. I admire you so much. Hurry up and give me an autograph, will you? Li Yundong was stunned. He looked at the book and pen that had been pushed in front of him and asked in confusion, what do you mean? Do you know me? The front desk lady winked at Li Yundong and said in a low voice, our eldest Shixiang Du Fei has told us about you. He admires you very much. Moreover, you became famous in the Battle of Mount Tianlong. You even stopped the heroes on Mount Gazelle. Oh, we all look forward to hearing about these things. Oh, no matter what, you have to give me an autograph. You are the most famous person in our younger generation now. Only then did Li Yundong understand. It turned out that this professional and beautiful front desk lady was actually a cultivator. But did cultivators also chase stars? To quickly find this site, please search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Chapter 444. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Li Yundong hadn't expected that the beautiful receptionist in front of him was actually a cultivator. What was even more ridiculous was that she was his fan. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and said, why do cultivators also chase stars? The receptionist quickly glanced at Mrs. Lee beside her. She pursed her lips into a smile, lowered her voice slightly, and said with a smile, what's wrong with cultivators? Aren't cultivators human? Cultivators also have the right to like and pursue whatever they want. It's just that the things that cultivators pay attention to and like are different from ordinary people. Li Yundong smiled and said, what's the difference? The receptionist smiled and said, ordinary people chase after stars, but they are nothing more than singers, movie stars, and international celebrities. In the eyes of cultivators like us, these things are just fleeting clouds, so we don't care about them. What we care about is which sect has produced which young and handsome great expert, and which beautiful and powerful great beauty. The more the receptionist spoke, the more excited she became, and her eyes lit up. At first, I admired our eldest Shixiang the most. Although his cultivation was not very powerful, his ability to make money was first class. Half of the income of our sect was earned by him. In the cultivation world, those who were more powerful than him could not make money as much as he could, and those who could make money more than him were not as powerful as him. Don't you think our eldest Shixiang is amazing? Li Yundong nodded with a smile. Junren Du is indeed extraordinary. The receptionist smiled again and said, but later, Sichuan Qingqing sent a genius, Zhang Cuni, who was rarely seen in 100 years. This guy could use the Sanhuang sword at the age of 13. Don't you think he's amazing? Wow, and I heard that this guy is quite handsome. So, I began to admire the young master of the Qingqing sect again. Li Yundong's smile became a little strange. You change so fast. The receptionist waved her hand and said with a smile, not yet. I haven't worshipped him for 2 years. Zhang Tianshi appeared in the Zhengyi school, so I began to worship Zhang Tianhe. Soon, Fairy Zi Yuan of the Linggong sect appeared after Zhang Tianhe. Oh, this Fairy Zi Yuan is really amazing. She has almost broken the cultivation records of all the female cultivators in the cultivation world, and she is also extremely beautiful. She is a stunning beauty in the world. As she spoke, the receptionist held her hands in front of her chest, as if she was holding her heart, and her eyes were full of infatuation. Oh, if only she could be half as powerful and half as beautiful as Fairy Zi Yuan. When Li Yundong heard someone praise Fairy Zi Yuan, he was also very happy, even happier than when someone praised him. He laughed and said, Fairy Zi Yuan is indeed like a fairy descending to the world. Her beauty is ethereal, and it's difficult for mortals to compare with her. As soon as he finished speaking, he heard the receptionist look at Li Yundong with infatuated eyes and say, however, before I had time to admire Zhenren Zi Yuan, you appeared out of nowhere. Not only did you defeat Zhenren Yu Yang in the Battle of Mount Tianlong, but you also defeated Zhenren Zi Yuan in public. Wow, this is really big news that has never been heard of in the cultivation world in the past 20 years. And after that, you even defeated the Lady of the Earthly Fire, Zhang Ling. Oh my God, Zhang Ling is also here. She is the sister of Zhang Tianshi of the Zhengyi school. She is a great cultivator, but she was also defeated by you. You have made the younger generation of cultivators proud. The receptionist spoke quickly, completely forgetting her identity in the rich ladies next to her. At first, Mrs. Li and the others were still listening to her, but after listening for a while, although they could understand every word the receptionist said, they were a little confused. However, what they knew was that this boy seemed to have a great background. Even more powerful than Du Fei. At first, Li Yundong could still listen to the receptionist with a smile, but after listening for a while, he suddenly couldn't help but smile bitterly. The receptionist blinked her eyes, looked at him curiously, and asked in confusion, "What's wrong? Am I wrong?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "No, I just think that the time of each idol you worship is very short. It can be seen that there are really talented people in the cultivation world, and they have only been leading for a few years. As your current idol, I feel a lot of pressure." The receptionist giggled, and her voice spread out like a silver bell. "You are so interesting." At this time, the sound of the elevator came from the hall, and a loud voice came out. "Shiji Wei Qing, what are you laughing at? Why are you laughing so happily?" As soon as this person's voice rang out, the whole hall was buzzing, as if this person had just spoken through a loudspeaker at a high decibel. It was so loud that everyone in the hall subconsciously covered their ears. When Li Yundong heard this voice, he suddenly felt a chill and thought to himself, "This person has such a strong aura. Li Yundong looked in the direction of the voice and saw a man walking out of the elevator. He was dressed in a black Tang suit and a pair of white cloth shoes. He was unexpectedly short, only about 1.6 meters tall. He had a crew cut, a capable face, and a pair of bright eyes. His two eyeballs were like burning fireballs, exuding a piercing gaze. No matter who he looked at, everyone would unconsciously avoid his eyes. Li Yundong looked in the direction of the voice and saw a man walking out of the elevator. As soon as Wei Qing saw him, she greeted him with a smile and said, "Yu Sheng, Shitty, you came at the right time. Do you know who this person is?" Yu Sheng's Shitty narrowed his eyes slightly, and the light in his eyes shot toward Li Yundong like a knife. Li Yundong only felt that this person's eyes suddenly lit up, as if two knives had really shot out of his eyes and stabbed into his own. His eyeballs actually hurt a little. This shock was no small matter. Li Yundong knew that it was very common for ordinary cultivators to have sharp eyes, because the eyes belonged to the liver, which was responsible for storing blood. If a person's eyes were sharp, it meant that this person's liver blood was extremely strong. The liver and kidney were the exterior and interior of each other. If the liver blood was strong, the function of this person's kidney must be strong, and the kidney essence would be full. Cultivators cultivated essence, qi, and blood, so it was natural for cultivators to have more essence, qi, and blood than ordinary people, so it was normal for their eyes to be sharper and brighter than ordinary people. Moreover, the eyes were the window to the soul. If a person was brave, his eyes would be fierce. If a person was weak, his eyes would be timid. Li Yundong was a person who was soft on the outside but hard on the inside. Usually, his eyes were gentle and approachable, but if he was angry and used his full strength to glare, even the most vicious gangsters would be deterred by his eyes and not dare to move. However, it did not mean that their eyes were really like weapons that could kill their opponents with their eyes. But the cultivator in front of him had obviously broken through this limit. His eyes were really lethal. Li Yundong knew that he was a reconstructed body of Jindan, and every part of his internal organs was much stronger than that of ordinary cultivators. Even his eyes were the same. But even he had been stung by the other party's glare. If ordinary people were caught off guard and stared at by him, their eyes would probably be blinded. Li Yundong was secretly surprised. He couldn't imagine what kind of cultivation a person had to go through to cultivate their eyesight to such a level, to be able to blind the other party's eyes with one glance. But Li Yundong didn't know that although he was surprised, Yu Sheng was even more surprised. When the cultivator named Yu Sheng saw that Li Yundong had only subconsciously narrowed his eyes slightly when he had glared at him, then acted as if nothing had happened. Yu Sheng was suddenly shocked. He knew that his master had picked him out of thousands of children because he had a pair of eyes that stood out from the masses. And he had started cultivating his eyes since he was 3 years old. Every morning and evening, he would apply the secret potion of the Dragon Gate sect, and every day at noon, when the sun was the strongest, he would look up at the sun to train his eyesight. At first, it was only a few seconds, but as time went by and his cultivation increased, he could now look directly at the sun for up to 4 hours when the sun was the most dazzling, and he was fine. If he used all his eyesight to stare at his opponent, not to mention ordinary people, even those with slightly lower cultivation could be blinded by him. But this person just narrowed his eyes slightly and was fine. This meant that this person's cultivation was definitely not lower than his. Yu Sheng knew that he had met a real master. He immediately looked at Li Yundong with a stern face. After looking at Li Yundong up and down for a while, he made an obeisance by cupping his hands and asked, "May I know your name?" Seeing that the other party's attitude was obviously respectful and polite, Li Yundong also made an obeisance with a smile. He was about to speak, but before he could say anything, Wei Qing, who was beside him, rushed to introduce him. "This is our famous Li Yundong. Haven't you wanted to meet him for a long time? Why, the real person is right in front of you, but you can't recognize him." After that, Wei Qing covered her mouth and laughed. Yu Xing's face became solemn. It turns out to be Zhenrenli, who has shaken Mount Tianlong. Sorry for not recognizing you. Li Yundong chuckled and made an obeisance by cupping his hands. You flatter me. Wei Qing seemed to be very affectionate as she smiled at Yu Xing and said, Shitty, you are usually proud of your cultivation. How is it? Have you met your match today? Let me tell you, my newly conferred idol is powerful. I don't think you are a match for him. Although Yu Xing was not tall and was half a head shorter than Wei Qing when he stood in front of her, there was a sense of love in his eyes as he looked at her. He chuckled and said, since Zhenrenli is famous all over the world, it must not be an undeserved reputation. But when he looked at Li Yundong, there was a hint of jealousy in his eyes. Wei Qing didn't notice the jealousy in his eyes. She still added fuel to the fire with a smile. Shitty, that's right. You should know that there is always someone better than you. Usually, you talk big. Do you know how powerful you are today? I saw that you glared at him just now, but Zhenrenli acted as if nothing had happened. Did you fail in your best kung fu? Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart when he heard this. Why does this woman want the world to be in chaos? Is she trying to flatter me or destroy me? Yu Xing listened to Wei Qing's words with a smile on his face and didn't refute her. However, he inadvertently glanced at Li Yundong quickly, his eyes full of dissatisfaction. After Wei Qing finished speaking, Yu Xing replied with a smile, I didn't even use 30% of my strength just now. Besides, you are a guest. I can't be rude, can I? As he said this, he smiled and said to Li Yundong, Zhenrenli, what can I do for you in Longmen Company? Li Yundong smiled and said, I'm here to see Mr. Du Fei. Yu Xing smiled and said, what a coincidence. Just now, eldest Shixiang told me about you. He said that if you come, you can go upstairs and find him directly. There's no need to make an appointment. Li Yundong was overjoyed. He cupped his hands and said with a smile, that's great. Would you please lead the way? Yu Xing smiled slightly. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, Mrs. Li, who had been in a daze, suddenly shouted, why can he go in but I can't? Yu Xing tilted his head and glanced at her, his face full of disdain. He said arrogantly, you. Just wait for the appointment obediently. Don't you know that people are different from each other? After saying that, he walked away, making Mrs. Li so angry that she almost fainted. Li Yundong looked at Mrs. Li sympathetically, then followed Yu Xing into the elevator. As soon as the elevator door opened, several young men and women in business suits poured into the hall at the same time. Obviously, they were all employees of this building. Some of the female employees looked at Li Yundong's new face curiously. From time to time, their eyes secretly swept over Li Yundong's handsome side face, secretly guessing which floor this valiant boy was on. When they reached the 5th floor, as soon as the elevator opened, many young and beautiful white-collar beauties in professional attire poured in. Before these beauties rushed into the elevator, they were all laughing and talking happily, looking a little shrewd. But when they saw Li Yundong standing in the elevator with his hands behind his back, they immediately quieted down and stood in the elevator like ladies. All of them kept their mouths shut and kept glancing at Li Yundong. Li Yundong saw that there were so many beautiful women in the elevator. He suddenly remembered what he had encountered in the building where Chao Kefi worked. He immediately smiled and felt that things had changed with the passage of time. Things were still the same, but people had changed. But before he could sigh for long, a hand suddenly stretched out from the side. The index finger was like a long spear, stabbing toward the Tsuchi acupoint on his arm secretly and quickly. I just got home. Sorry, thanks to everyone, my mother-in-law's operation was smooth laser minimally invasive surgery, and now she can get out of bed and walk. To quickly find this website, please search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Chapter 445. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu, Sanlian literature website. The Tsuchi acupoint on a person's arm was not an important acupoint, but it was located on the Yangming large intestine meridian of the hand and could provide the arm with yang qi. If this place was hit, although it would not be life-threatening, at least the arm would not be able to be used in a short period of time. At least it would be paralyzed for a long time, unable to use any strength. It was precisely because the other party had hit the Tsuchi acupoint and not some other vital acupoint that Li Yundong knew that Yu Sheng was jealous and unconvinced, so he had secretly invited him to fight. Obviously, Yu Sheng did not want the two of them to fight to the death, nor did he want the other people in the elevator to find out. Therefore, when he poked at Li Yundong with his finger, his body was slightly sideways to cover his movement. Seeing the other party poke at him with a finger, Li Yundong also leaned to one side, and then half of his body blocked the eyes of the other people in the elevator. His fingers were like hooks, quickly grabbing Yu Sheng's finger. Li Yundong happened to borrow the move of Sherneng that he had competed with before. His little and ring fingers were buckled inward, his index and middle fingers were slightly bent, and the strength of his thumb penetrated through the fingertips. The whole hand shape was like an eagle's claw. The other party wanted to hit his Tsuchi acupoint, so Li Yundong dodged it with a sideways movement. Then he used his other hand to use his thumb, index finger, and middle finger to buckle the three acupoints near the other party's wrist, Yangqi, Yanggu, and Yangshi. Yu Sheng was also a cultivator. Of course, he knew what it meant if these three acupoints were buckled. Without waiting for his fingers to poke, he immediately turned his wrist and grabbed Li Yundong's fingers with his 5 fingers, as if he was holding a tower. Li Yundong saw that the other party did not dodge and forcibly hit his fingers. Obviously, the kung fu of his hands must be very deep, and he was very confident in the strength of his fingers. Li Yundong's heart slightly sunk, and he thought to himself, I have never lost in terms of finger strength. Even Sherneng's finger bones were immediately broken by my touch. Li Yundong also used all his strength to hit the other party's fingers. Suddenly, with a bang, the fingers of the two collided, immediately making a sound like steel colliding. However, the steel was wrapped in a layer of skin and flesh, making the sound a little muffled. The white-collar workers in the elevator were stunned when they heard the voice. They felt strange in their hearts and kept looking around as if they wanted to find out where the strange voice came from. Li Yundong saw that Yu Sheng had hidden his moves. It was obvious that he was afraid that there were secular mortals in the elevator. He also relied on his own skills and courage to fight with him in front of secular mortals. Obviously, he was not afraid that his means would be discovered by the people around him. Therefore, Li Yundong did not fight back with great fanfare. When his fingers collided with Yu Sheng's, he saw that the other party did not show any signs of injury. Instead, his own fingers felt a faint pain. Li Yundong's heart trembled. He knew that he had met a strong opponent. If he continued to fight recklessly, he was afraid that a private fight would turn into a big fight, which would be noticed by the people around him. Therefore, he immediately grabbed the opponent's wrist with his fingers like a long snake, trying to subdue the opponent by capturing him. Li Yundong was surprised, but Yu Sheng was even more shocked. He was a disciple of a famous and orthodox sect, and he was also an inner disciple. He had been soaking in medicinal water and eating elixirs since he was a child. His body was so strong that it was no less than the body of Jindan reconstruction. He originally thought that even if Li Yundong could survive this, his reaction would be a little slower. However, he didn't expect that not only did Li Yundong's speed not slow down, but the speed of his counterattack was a little faster than before. However, he felt a sharp pain in his fingers, and his reaction was a little slower than before. His wrist was immediately touched by Li Yundong. Yu Sheng's hair suddenly stood on end. After all, he was one of the best among the younger generation of the Chuanjin Dragon sect. His reaction speed was incredible. Seeing that his 3 acupoints, Yangqi, Yanggu, and Yangshi were about to be grabbed, he barely twisted his arm and missed 2 acupoints. Then, he turned his wrist and put his fingers on the Yangshi acupoint on Li Yundong's arm. The fight between the two of them was as fast as lightning. The white-collared beauties in the elevator only heard the muffled sound of fingers colliding. The two of them had already intertwined their hands, pinched each other's acupuncture points, and were entangled together. After the white-collar workers in the elevator looked around, their eyes fell on Li Yundong and Yusheng at the same time. At this time, half of their bodies were facing the people in the elevator. One of their hands was hanging by their side, and the other was blocked by their body. No one knew what they were doing. However, judging from their posture and the position of their hands, the white-collar workers felt that the two of them were shaking hands. In particular, the two of them were looking at each other with narrowed eyes. Their eyes did not blink at all, like 2 stone statues. Some white-collar workers with flexible minds thought to themselves, what is the relationship between these two people? Is it necessary to be so intimate in the elevator? There were also some white-collar workers with more old-fashioned ideas who thought very evilly, these two people are so intimate. Could it be that they are gay? Oh my God, it can't be. Such a handsome guy is actually gay. Isn't it a waste of God's gifts? As soon as these various thoughts came to mind, Li Yundong and Yusheng mobilized their Jinqi at the same time to attack each other fiercely. As soon as they mobilized their Jinqi, they immediately fought together like 2 huge armies, and the battlefield was between their tightly clasped arms and palms. The qi and blood of cultivators were extremely vigorous, so their strength was also amazing. As soon as Li Yundong and Yusheng used their qi, their feet involuntarily borrowed the ground. But at this time, they were in the elevator, and when they borrowed the force at the same time, their strength was more than 10,000 pounds. The elevator suddenly made a terrible buzzing sound of steel bars being pulled, and the upward momentum became slower. The white-collar workers in the elevator thought that the elevator had broken down, and they suddenly screamed in horror. Some of them held their heads and shouted, some desperately pressed the button of the nearest floor, and some took the emergency phone in the elevator and shouted hysterically into the phone. Li Yundong and Yusheng looked around and listened in all directions. They both knew that when the immortals fought, the mortals suffered. But at this time, they were like arrows on a bowstring, and they had to shoot. Their Jinqi was intertwined in their wrists and palms, like a torrential flood. How could they retreat so easily? As the two of them hesitated for a moment, the elevator made another terrible squeaking sound, as if the steel bars hanging above were being broken one by one. For the white-collar workers who didn't understand what was going on, this sound was really terrible. It was like the whisper of the god of death, ferocious and terrifying. They were all so scared that they almost went crazy. Some were crying, some were shouting, and some were even sitting on the floor of the elevator, crying loudly. Li Yundong knew that if he continued to compete with Yusheng like this, the elevator would definitely not be able to withstand the force and fall down. They would not be injured, but the others in the elevator would definitely be smashed into meat paste. While Li Yundong was controlling his qi, he lowered his voice and said, "Let's stop." Yusheng quickly glanced to the side and nodded slightly. The two of them withdrew some of their strength at the same time. In this way, they withdrew a little bit of their Jinqi. Soon, their Jinqi was completely absorbed. After withdrawing their Jinqi, the two of them were just about to breathe a sigh of relief when suddenly there was a bang sound on the top of the elevator. The elevator suddenly fell down crazily. For a moment, the other people in the elevator screamed at the top of their lungs. Their voices were so shrill that even the steel and concrete walls couldn't stop them. Li Yundong was shocked. He immediately released his yang spirit, and then changed from yang spirit to yin spirit. After getting out of the elevator, he immediately changed back to yang spirit. His hands suddenly grabbed the steel cable of the elevator that was falling crazily. But as soon as he grabbed the steel cable, his yang spirit body was brought down by the powerful falling force of the elevator, and he staggered. Although Li Yundong's yang spirit body was powerful, he had no place to borrow strength in midair. For a moment, his yang spirit was dragged down. He saw the elevator falling all the way, creating countless sparks from the friction. It wouldn't be long before it fell to the bottom, and the others in the elevator would be smashed into meat paste. Li Yundong's heart tightened. He gritted his teeth and was about to urge his Jinqi to make the yang spirit bigger when he suddenly saw a flash of golden light. With a clang, a golden halberd pierced through the middle of the broken steel cable of the elevator, and the tip of the spear went straight through the opposite wall. The falling elevator was blocked by the force of the halberd, and its momentum suddenly stopped. With a buzz, it stopped in midair. Li Yunyang turned his head and saw a man in golden armor floating in the air not far away from him, holding a golden spear in his hand. The man was as tall as an iron tower, and he was extraordinarily handsome. There was a heavenly eye between his eyebrows, which was awe-inspiring. Li Yundong was stunned and thought to himself, "Damn, Yu Sheng's true god can't be Erlang Shen, right?" While he was in a daze, the heavy momentum of the elevator pulled the halberd downwards. The tip of the halberd cut through the hard concrete wall and slid downwards. Li Yundong didn't think too much about it. He suddenly activated his Jinqi, and the yang spirit transformed into the immovable wisdom king with 3 heads and 6 arms. His body was huge, and he almost occupied all the positions in the elevator tunnel by himself. 2 of his arms were holding the steel rope of the elevator, and the other 4 were holding the 4 sides of the elevator tunnel. The 6 arms suddenly exerted force, and the muscles of the yang spirit body bulged like a dragon taking root in a tree. Li Yundong's yang spirit also spewed out 2 streams of red and black qi at the same time, and his appearance was extremely terrifying. With this force, Li Yundong finally stopped the momentum of the elevator. At this time, the falling elevator finally stopped. The white-collar workers in the elevator were still in shock, crying and laughing at the same time. They had no idea that they had almost become the victims of the battle between Li Yundong and Yu Sheng. At this time, Li Yundong glanced at Yu Sheng's yang spirit, still in a state of shock. He saw that Yu Sheng was looking at his yang spirit with a face full of doubt and eagerness to try. In particular, the heavenly eye between his eyebrows suddenly opened wide, spewing out a fanatical and excited desire to fight. The air around him seemed to have become hot. Li Yundong suddenly cursed in his heart, "Damn it, this bastard, he still wants to fight? Does he really want to die?" There was one more chapter in the evening. To quickly find this website, please search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Chapter 446. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Li Yundong saw that the other party was eager to try and wanted to continue fighting regardless of the safety of others. He immediately shouted in a low voice, "Jinren, you don't want to watch all the people in this elevator fall to their deaths, do you?" Yu Sheng narrowed his eyes slightly. After a while, the desire to fight in his eyes slowly disappeared, and the heavenly eye between his eyebrows slowly closed. Yu Sheng stared at Li Yundong and said in a low voice, "Jinren, I didn't expect you to be a Buddhist and Taoist cultivator. Are you the successor of the Wulu sect?" Li Yundong looked around and said angrily, "Is this a good place to talk?" Yu Sheng also took a look and saw that the 4 arms of Li Yundong's yang spirit were tightly gripping the cement wall in the elevator tunnel. His fingers, which were like iron hooks, were constantly peeling the cement from the wall. The broken pieces fell to the top of the elevator, making a tinkling sound. The sound echoed in the elevator tunnel, which was very harsh. The white-collar workers in the elevator couldn't help but scream in horror. Yu Sheng snorted and said, "Then we'll fight another day." Li Yundong also nodded and said, "That's exactly what I was thinking." The 2 of them looked at each other and finally stopped fighting. Instead, they joined hands to save people. The 2 young spirit masters worked together to stabilize the falling elevator. While controlling the yang spirit, Li Yundong was distracted. He controlled his body to walk to the door of the elevator and forcibly opened the iron door of the elevator with both hands. Li Yundong turned around and shouted, "Why aren't you getting out?" At this time, more than half of the elevator had stopped on the 9th floor. Outside the elevator, there were two white-collar workers waiting for the elevator, talking and laughing. The two of them saw the elevator door open and were about to enter when they suddenly saw that they could only see half of the elevator. Then, from this half of the elevator, people could be seen desperately climbing out. The people inside were like ghosts released from hell, crying non-stop for help. Some people collapsed on the ground as soon as they got out of the elevator. Their eyes were streaming with tears, and they were still in a state of shock. The two of them were stunned. They had no idea what was going on. They just subconsciously pulled the white-collar workers who were climbing out of the elevator. Some of the white-collar workers in the elevator were strong-willed. After they escaped from the elevator, they remembered that there were still two people in the elevator who had not come out. They turned their heads and saw that Li Yundong was pushing people out one by one, as if he had not thought about how they would escape by themselves. All of them secretly admired this calm and composed man. He was actually willing to sacrifice himself to save others. When Li Yundong pushed out the last white-collar worker, the people outside the elevator all reached out to Li Yundong and Yusheng and shouted anxiously, "Hurry up and get out. We'll help you." When Li Yundong saw their panicked and worried expressions, he felt a little sorry for them. He smiled slightly and then looked back at Yusheng. When their eyes met, they seemed to understand each other's thoughts. What kind of joke is this? Let cultivators like us crawl out of such a dog hole. If other cultivators were to find out, wouldn't they laugh their heads off? Li Yundong and Yusheng nodded at the same time and withdrew the young spirit that was pulling the elevator at the same time. As soon as the elevator lost its support, it suddenly fell down like a meteorite with a bang. The people who had been rescued let out cries of horror at the same time. All of them were trembling and their faces were pale. The people waiting for the elevator on the first floor did not know that such a terrible thing had happened upstairs. They only waited until the elevator fell to the ground with a loud bang and countless dust spewed out from the cracks in the elevator. They were shocked and looked at the elevator that had fallen with a huge change of expression. For a moment, everyone in the hall gathered together and whispered to each other in horror, "What's going on? It seems that the elevator fell down. It's so scary. I wonder if there's anyone in there." "Yes. I saw someone go in just now." "Oh my God, call the police, call 120, and call an ambulance." While they were in a mess, the door outside the elevator was suddenly pushed open with a crash, and two men walked out of the smoke. Everyone took a closer look and saw that one of the two men was tall and the other short. Neither of them seemed to be injured. They looked calm and composed, as if they had not just walked out of the elevator that had fallen, but out of a luxury car to attend a banquet. At this time, Wei Qing, who was on duty at the front desk, also rushed over. She looked at Li Yundong and Yusheng in surprise and said, "Jinrenli, shitty, what happened to you?" Li Yundong brushed the dust off his body, glanced at the people around him, and smiled at Wei Qing. "The elevator is broken." The people around were all listening to them. When they heard Li Yundong's words, they all roared, "Sure enough, the elevator is broken. It was so dangerous." Fortunately, no one was killed. Yes, these two people are really lucky. They didn't even get a scratch on their skin. They're so lucky. Only Wei Qing glanced at Li Yundong and Yusheng suspiciously. She lowered her voice and asked tentatively, "You two? Did you fight just now?" Li Yundong looked at her helplessly and said, "Thanks to you, Junren, you wanted to compete with me, but the place he chose was a little inappropriate." Wei Qing was obviously a person who wanted the world to be in chaos. Not only was she not worried about the impact of the broken elevator on the company's reputation, but she also pulled Li Yundong's sleeve excitedly and asked in a low voice, "Who won? Tell me, who won?" Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "Can't you ask your shitty?" Wei Qin glanced at Yu Sheng and said with a smile, "My shitty is born to be strong. Even if he loses, he won't admit it." Li Yundong also glanced at Yu Sheng and happened to see Yu Sheng looking at him. This short but arrogant young man snorted and turned his head away. Li Yundong shook his head and said with a wry smile, "The two of us tied. For the time being, the winner hasn't been decided." A trace of disappointment flashed in Wei Qin's eyes. "Ah! A tie." At this time, Yu Sheng suddenly said in a cold voice, "The winner of the Taoist assembly will definitely be decided with you." In the face of the aggressive Yu Sheng, Li Yundong didn't get angry. He smiled slightly and nodded. "Of course. But before that, please lead me to Du Fei, Zhenren Yu." Yu Sheng snorted, put his hands behind his back, turned around, and left. He looked at the people around him as if they were nothing. Seeing that he was about to enter another elevator, Li Yundong quickly said, "Don't take the elevator. Take the stairs." Yu Sheng walked to the door of the elevator, but stopped abruptly. He turned around and walked to the stairwell. Wei Qin looked at him strangely and couldn't help muttering in a low voice, "It's strange. Except for Master, my shitty never listens to anyone. How could he listen to Zhenrenli?" It seems that Li Yundong shocked him greatly in the fight just now. Otherwise, he would never have listened to him and taken the stairs. Seeing the two of them turn around and enter the stairwell, she couldn't help but chase after them and shout, "Hey, you two, don't break the stairs again." Li Yundong smiled bitterly when he heard this and thought to himself, "Do I look like a demolition officer?" As the two of them walked up, they heard the sound of footsteps coming from upstairs, as if someone was rushing down anxiously. When they reached the third floor, the people on both sides looked up and were immediately stunned. Li Yundong looked over and saw that the people who had escaped from the elevator were rushing down anxiously, as if they wanted to see what had happened to the elevator that had fallen. These white-collar workers, who were still in a state of shock, suddenly saw Li Yundong and Yu Sheng walking up the stairs unscathed as if nothing had happened. They were all dumbfounded. They looked at Yu Sheng and Li Yundong with their mouths agape. For a moment, they couldn't wrap their heads around it. It seemed that they couldn't understand why the two men who had fallen from the 9th floor were completely fine. Yu Sheng looked arrogant and didn't even look at them. He still walked up with his hands behind his back. When he passed by them, it was as if he only regarded them as a group of wooden blocks. However, Li Yundong nodded at them with a smile and asked in a gentle voice, "Are you all right?" These white-collar workers, who were usually powerful in the workplace, looked at Li Yundong in a daze and shook their heads mechanically, like clay puppets. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Climb more stairs in the future. It's safe and you can also exercise." The white-collar workers nodded in unison, then watched as Li Yundong continued to climb up the stairs at a leisurely pace with a smile on his face. When Li Yundong was far away, they seemed to have come back to their senses. They all let out a long breath and leaned against the wall softly, but their heads were all raised. Their eyes were fixed on the figure that was climbing higher and higher, and their eyes were fixed on the figure that was climbing higher and higher. After a long time, one of them let out a long sigh. "Sigh, I've seen countless men, but I've never seen a man like him." As soon as she finished speaking, someone else also sighed like a love-struck fool. "Yes, he's so handsome. I don't know if he has a girlfriend." The others immediately sneered and said, "Don't be silly. How could such a handsome, gentle, and brave man not have a girlfriend? Are all the women in the world blind?" After saying that, the white-collar workers sighed in unison. They were all distressed and began to feel sorry for themselves. But none of them knew that this disaster, which had almost killed them, was one of the initiators of it. Li Yundong followed Yu Sheng all the way to the 19th floor. Yu Sheng pointed to a room at the top of the corridor and said in a deep voice, "Eldest Shixiang is in that office." Go and find him yourself. After that, he turned around and left. When he reached the stairwell, he stopped again, turned his face to Jinrenli, and said in a deep voice, Jinrenli, see you at the Taoist assembly. Li Yundong smiled and cupped his hands at him. Then he watched his figure disappear and shook his head helplessly. Now I'm really a tall tree that attracts the wind. Wherever I go, there are people who want to defeat me. Li Yundong quickly put these trivial thoughts behind him. He knocked on Du Fei's door and heard a familiar voice coming from inside. It was Du Fei. Please come in. Li Yundong pushed the door open and went in. He said with a wry smile, Junren Du, it's really hard to see you. Du Fei was busy lying on the table. When he heard Li Yundong's voice, he suddenly raised his head and asked in surprise, Jinrenli. Why are you here? Li Yundong laughed and said, why can't I be here? Oh, Mr. Du, it's really easy to see Hades, but difficult to deal with. Du Fei was dressed in a famous brand suit and looked like a successful businessman. He didn't look like a cultivator at all. He also laughed and stood up to greet Li Yundong warmly. Please sit down, please sit down. Come on, sit down. Du Fei pressed a button on the table. Not long after, a young and beautiful woman came in. Du Fei smiled and said, Suwan, pour a cup of tea for our distinguished guest. This woman had obviously never seen Du Fei greet someone so warmly and politely, and this person was so young. She looked at Li Yundong curiously, then responded softly and left. After watching her go out, Li Yundong waved his hand with a smile and said, Mr. Du, you don't have to be so polite. I have something urgent to do later, so I have to rush to another place. This time, I didn't come to the temple for no reason. I have something to ask of you. Du Fei chuckled, and the smile on his face didn't change. He said with a smile, what's the matter, Jinrenli? If I can do it, I will definitely help you. Li Yundong smiled and said, well, then I'll get straight to the point. I want to exchange the burning thumb pot with you. When Du Fei heard this, he was stunned. The smile on his face disappeared little by little, and his brows furrowed little by little. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he asked tentatively, what's wrong, Jinren Du? Is there anything wrong? Du Fei sighed and smiled bitterly. Jinrenli, this burning thumb pot was borrowed by someone a day ago. Sigh, my fellow readers are urging me to write, and I'm also worried. But there are so many things to do. Today, my mother-in-law went out to buy tomatoes the day after her surgery. My leader and I were scared out of our wits. Sigh, although the wound of minimally invasive surgery is small, you can't go through so much trouble. How is it? You fell down again, right? Well, I have to go back to Shanghai on Saturday. What a tragedy. I don't dare to say more, but I'll try my best to make 2 chapters a day. Alas. To quickly find this site, please search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Chapter 447. Go to the net. Borrowed it? Li Yundong was shocked and quickly asked, who borrowed it? How could such an important magical item be borrowed? Seeing Li Yundong's anxious expression, Du Fei tried to persuade him with a wry smile. Jinrenli, don't worry. Listen to me slowly. Go to the internet. Li Yundong calmed down and was secretly surprised. He thought to himself, how could it be so coincidental? I was just about to catch Yan Fang's young spirit when the burning thumb pot was borrowed, and it was only a day ago. Could it be that Yan Fang borrowed it? If that's the case, then it's terrible. Li Yundong quickly asked, did Yan Fang borrow it? Du Fei was stunned. Yan Fang? Of course not. It was Master Purin of Shiyuan Temple who borrowed it. Li Yundong was a little relieved. He asked curiously, why would Master Purin borrow the burning thumb pot from you? Du Fei sighed slightly and said, Jinrenli, sit down first and listen to me slowly. While he was talking, the young and beautiful secretary pushed the door open and walked in, holding a plate with a cup of tea on it. Du Fei smiled and said, Jinrenli, you own a tea house, so I won't show off in front of you. This is Longjing tea before Yuqian. Try it and see if it's authentic. Li Yundong knew that the burning thumb pot had not fallen into Yan Fang's hands, so he calmed down. He took the teacup with both hands and smiled politely at the beautiful secretary. Then he took a sip of the tea, nodded slightly, and praised, Good, the tea is clear and fragrant. Good tea. Du Fei chuckled and nodded to the secretary, who was standing aside and waiting for orders. There's nothing for you to do here. You can leave first. The secretary looked at Li Yundong curiously one last time, then left with the tea tray. After the door closed, Du Fei sat opposite Li Yundong. He patted his thigh and sighed slightly. This matter has to be told from the past. As you know, Fahai's burning thumb pot fell into my hands by chance. At that time, many Buddhist cultivators wanted to exchange it with me, but I didn't agree to it. However, I'm a Taoist, so I can't use Buddhist artifacts. Therefore, holding this burning thumb pot feels like a waste of God's gift. A few days ago, I found out that you, Jinrenli, had obtained the Renyuan Jindan, so I had the idea of exchanging 3 things for 2 things from you. Who would have thought that I, Du Fei, would not be able to obtain the Renyuan Jindan? Du Fei sighed and let out a long sigh. His eyes were full of loneliness and bitterness. Although I, Du Fei, am the eldest senior brother of the Chuanjian Dragon sect, my aptitude is worse than the others. I am not a proper inner disciple, so I can only be an outer disciple. No matter how hard I practice, I can't get the favor of the master and get his true teachings. If it wasn't for my ability to earn money, I'm afraid that I wouldn't have my current position in the Chuanjian Dragon sect. Seeing that Du Fei was so depressed, Li Yundong couldn't help but advise him, Jinren Du, everyone has their own destiny. Moreover, Zhang Sanfeng, Jinren Zhang, also came to the Tao at an old age. He was a late bloomer, but he is still like this. You are still in your prime. Why are you so depressed? Du Fei's spirit was slightly lifted. He smiled at Li Yundong and said, Jinrenli, you are right. It's just that sometimes, when I look at cultivators like you who are much younger than me and find that your cultivation is extremely amazing, I feel very upset. Especially when I know that you, Jinrenli, have cultivated to the Yangshan phase in about half a year. This kind of cultivation speed is really shocking and unprecedented. Du Fei gave Li Yundong a thumbs up and said, Jinrenli, your cultivation is so high and your cultivation speed is so fast that I have never seen it before. In my opinion, if you continue to cultivate at this speed, in a few years, you will become the most powerful person in the world, catching up with Jinren Zhang of our Taoist sect 500 years ago. There was Jinren Zhang in ancient times, and now there is Jinrenli. This is also a good thing. Li Yundong chuckled and waved his hand. Jinren Du, you are too polite. You are flattering me too much. If Jinren Zhang of the Jingyi school heard this, they would have a problem with it. Du Fei sneered and said, Hey, I'm not talking about Jinren Zhang of the Jingyi school. I'm talking about Jinren Zhang Sanfeng. Although the past Taoist masters of the Jingyi school are powerful, there is still a gap between them and Jinren Zhang Sanfeng. Li Yundong saw that Du Fei was slandering the Jingyi school. He didn't know whether Du Fei was trying to trick him or the dirty relationship between the sections. He smiled slightly and didn't answer. He just drank his tea quietly. Du Fei knew that Li Yundong and the Jingyi school had a grudge against each other. When he saw that Li Yundong was able to resist the urge to speak ill of the Jingyi school, he couldn't help but have a higher opinion of Li Yundong in his heart. Li Yundong is so young and he is so good at cultivation and fighting. That's one thing, but I didn't expect him to be so shrewd. Logically speaking, which young master with such a high cultivation level like him isn't proud and arrogant? My shitty is always arrogant and doesn't even put me, his Shixiang, in his eyes. Junrenli is not only approachable and has a gentle attitude, but what's even rarer is that he is also quite sophisticated. I don't know how he cultivated. Amazing, amazing. Du Fei's mind raced like lightning. Seeing that Li Yundong didn't answer his question, he smiled and said, "That's a bit of a long story. Let's get back to the topic. Junrenli, do you know which temple Fa Hai is an eminent monk?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Last time, I remember reading the relevant books after the incident. If I remember correctly, Fa Hai became famous in Jinshan Temple in Zhenjiang City, Jiangsu Province. The original name of Jinshan Temple was Zixin Temple. Fa Hai subdued the 1,000-year-old white python in the Zixin Temple and dug out a large amount of gold from the mountain behind the temple. Fa Hai handed the gold over to the Zixin Temple's governor, Li Qi. Li Qi then reported this matter to Tang Xuanzong. Tang Xuanzong then bestowed the gold to Fa Hai so that he could repair the temple and name it Jinshan Temple. Am I right, Junrendu? Du Fei nodded and praised, "Junrenli, you are so knowledgeable. I admire you." Li Yundong laughed and said, "I only found out about it these days. I didn't know about it a few days ago." Du Fei also laughed and said, "Junrenli, you are really sincere. You are admirable. You are right." Fa Hai is a famous exorcist master of Jinshan Temple in Zhenjiang City, Jiangsu Province, and his magical item fell into my hands by chance. A while ago, the abbot of Jinshan Temple came to me and wanted to exchange for Fa Hai's magical item, but I politely refused. At that time, I thought it was over, but I didn't expect that yesterday, the abbot of Shiyuan Temple, Puran, would be entrusted by the abbot of Jinshan Temple to come to me to discuss the matter of borrowing the burning thumb pot. Li Yundong asked curiously, "Why do you want to borrow it?" Du Fei chuckled and said, "Because they know that I won't exchange it. They don't have what I want." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "Junrendu, you are probably the best in cultivation in the business world. In the cultivation world, you are probably the best in business. You've got a good plan." Du Fei laughed out loud and said, "Junrenli, you must be joking. Although our Chuanjian dragon sect has power all over the world, our plate is too big and we can't make ends meet. If it weren't for my careful support, I'm afraid that a group of old and young masters would have been starving." Li Yundong smiled and asked curiously, "But why did you lend it to Puran, Junrendu? What does Master Puran want to do with this magical item?" At this time, Du Fei restrained his smile and said, "Master Puran said that he wanted to use this magical item and the Bafang demon subduing formation to subdue demons. There are many eminent monks in the world who deceive the world, but there are only a few real eminent monks, and Master Puran is one of them. He said that he wanted to subdue demons, so he must mean it. He would never lie to me. Therefore, if he wanted to borrow it, I would lend it to him. He would never borrow from Jingzhou like Liu Bei and not return it." Li Yundong couldn't help but look solemn. He cupped his hands and said, "Junrendu, you are so heroic and broad-minded. I admire you." Du Fei smiled bitterly and said, "Junrenli, don't mock me. If you want to exchange the burning thumb pot with me, you'd better wait for Master Puran to return it to me first. You see, I'm talking heroically, but in fact, I'm trembling in my heart." After that, the two of them laughed together. Li Yundong said with a smile, "Junrendu, since the burning thumb pot is not with you, I won't bother you anymore. I'll go to Master Puran's place to have a look." Du Fei also cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Junrenli, I'm really sorry for making you come here in vain today. If you want to find me, just call me. There's a contact number on my business card. I'll visit you in person." Li Yundong shook his head slightly and said with a smile, "That won't do. If you ask for help, you should be polite. How can you ask for help and let others come to you? Du Fei chuckled. Junrenli, you are young, but you are very experienced and steady. I admire you. Li Yundong got up with a smile and said goodbye, but when he walked to the door, he seemed to think of something. He turned around and asked, by the way, Junren-du, do you know that there is a Mrs. Li downstairs who wants to see you, but she can't make an appointment? Du Fei was stunned and then asked in surprise, Mrs. Li. Is she your wife, Junren Li? Oh, how could there be such a rude thing? What is Wei Qing doing? She even stopped your wife from seeing her, Junren Li. She. That's not right. Junren Li, when did you get married? At first, Li Yundong could still hold back his laughter, but later, he couldn't help laughing. He waved his hand and said with a smile, Junren-du, don't joke. Mrs. Li is not my wife. There are at least a few million women with the surname Li in this world. Could it be that they are all my wives? Du Fei also understood. He laughed, walked to the table, and pressed the phone button. He picked up the phone and asked Wei Qing, who was at the front desk, about this matter. After he put down the phone, Du Fei said with a smile, I see. She is Shen Wancai's second wife. When she was giving birth to a child, Shen Wancai came to me for fortune-telling. At that time, I was still young. I gave him a random divination and said that he would have a son, but this son would not be able to inherit his property in the future, so I asked him to go back. After that, Shen Wancai did not believe my words. For a long time, he was angry and did not contact me, but I don't know why his second wife came to me again. As he said this, Du Fei snorted with an arrogant expression. When he didn't believe me, he abandoned me like a worn-out clog. Now that he has a favor to ask of me, she comes to me. Isn't that cheap? Let her wait and see. Besides, I also know this woman. She is selfish, mean, greedy and ungrateful. It's good to let her be rebuffed, so that she doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth all day long. Does she think that I, Du Fei, will ask Shen Wancai for help? What a joke. It has always been officials and businessmen who come to us cultivators. When have we ever asked these ordinary people, who are full of the smell of money and decay? Li Yundong couldn't help but give him a thumbs up and praise him. Junren-du is a proud person. I like what you said. If there is a chance someday, I will have a drink with you for this. Du Fei laughed, cupped his hands, and said with a smile, well said, Junren-li, when will you get married and hold a banquet? I will definitely come. At that time, I will not go home until I am drunk. Li Yundong chuckled and said, that's a deal. But he couldn't help but think in his heart, married? Does this girl have a household registration or an ID card? I'm afraid she is an illegal resident, right? Can she get married? I am a human, but this girl is a demon. If we really get married, what will be our child? Could it be a transvestite? Li Yundong thought with a snicker in his heart. Du Fei enthusiastically sent Li Yundong all the way downstairs and ordered a car to take Li Yundong to Shiyuan Temple. It was not until the car was far away that he slowly turned around and walked back. Li Yundong took the special car arranged by Du Fei and arrived at Shiyuan Temple in about 20 minutes. After getting out of the car, he politely said goodbye to the driver, and then walked to the reception monk at the door. Just as he was about to talk to him, he saw the reception monk stare at him for a while, and then suddenly smiled and said, Are you benefactor Li Yundong? Li Yundong asked curiously, Do you know me? The reception monk smiled slightly, turned sideways, and made a gesture. Benefactor Li, our abbot told me to wait for you here. Li Yundong was surprised. Master Purin actually knew that I was coming. What a coincidence. Note, the 18th emperor is Tang Xuanzong, not Tang Xuanzong. I seem to have typed the wrong chapter when I mentioned Fahai. I wrote Tang Xuanzong. Please forgive me. In addition, I would like to thank 345 for generously voting for the VIP ticket. Thank you very much. You are too polite. Chapter 448. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu, Sanlian literature website. Hearing Li Yundong's words, the reception monk chuckled, saluted with one hand, and said with a smile, benefactorly, "You'll know when you come with me." Li Yundong put his palms together and returned the salute. "Please lead the way." The reception monk nodded, turned around, and led the way. Li Yundong saw that it was neither a weekend nor a holiday, but there were still many guests coming to Shiyuan Temple to visit the scenic spots and historical sites. Incense was burning in front of the Mahavira Hall, and many guests from Japan and Korea were taking photos in front of the temple. Seeing this, Li Yundong sighed in his heart. After all, this is an ancient temple with a history of 800 years. Its foundation is deep, and other sects can't compare with it. Although Jingyi School, Dragon Gate Sect, Gazao Sect, and other sects are powerful and have deep roots, most of their ancestral courts have declined greatly. In terms of incense burning, they are far inferior to this ancient Buddhist temple. Li Yundong thought to himself, if I return to Mount Tianlong in the future, I will have to manage my ancestral court well. I can't lose my foundation. But thinking of this, Li Yundong couldn't help but think, if I don't become the leader of the Fox Zen school, I don't know which sect I will join in the future. If I don't join any sect, wouldn't I be a lonely ghost without an organization? Although he was the leader of the Fox Zen school, no matter what, he felt like he was living under someone else's roof. Moreover, Lu Yi was not dead. He didn't know when he would come back. If he came back at that time, should he give up his position as the leader or not? Li Yundong couldn't help but be a little lost in thought along the way until the reception monk said with a smile, benefactorly, "We've arrived. The abbot invites you in." Only then did Li Yundong wake up from his dream. After bowing to the reception monk, he stepped into the meditation room in the backyard of Master Purin. As soon as he entered the door, Li Yundong saw Master Purin sitting cross-legged under the shrine of Buddha Tathagata. He pointed to the rush cushion in front of him and chuckled with his eyes down. "Jinrenli, your brows are tightly furrowed. It seems that you have something on your mind." After bowing respectfully, Li Yundong sat down cross-legged on the futon and asked, "People live in this world and have too many things to worry about. Who can have no worries?" Master Purin laughed and said, benefactorly, "Are you going to play tricks with me?" Li Yundong also laughed. "I wouldn't dare to show off in front of an expert, Master. However, I just heard from the receptionist monk that Master Purin seemed to have already known that I was coming." Purin nodded slightly. "Yes." Li Yundong smiled in awe and said, "The Kung Fu of Buddhism's Kung Fu of predestination is really powerful. Can you predict everything?" Purin laughed. Instead of answering, he asked, "Jinrenli, do you know why our cultivation world has declined?" Li Yundong was a little surprised by Purin's question, but he still answered, "As far as I know, it's because after the Qing dynasty entered the Shanhaiguan Pass, Tibetan Buddhism suppressed the Buddhism of the Central Plains, and so did Taoism. After the end of the Qing dynasty, the country was in turmoil, and it coincided with the outbreak of the May 4th movement, followed by the Great Leap Forward, the destruction of the Four Olds, and the terrible 10 years of turmoil. During this period of time, both Buddhism and Taoism suffered extremely serious damage in the cultivation world. Moreover, the cultural soil of Buddhism and Taoism had almost disappeared, so it was naturally difficult for the cultivation culture rooted in this soil to survive. Is that so, Master Purin? Purin smiled slightly and said, "You're only right about one thing, but you don't know the other." Li Yundong asked respectfully, "Master, please enlighten me." Purin said with a smile, "Since ancient times, if you want to send a message, it's either a fast horse or a carrier pigeon. As for us cultivators, we can cultivate to the realm of spirit wander, making our souls fly in the sky and travel thousands of miles in an instant. We can transmit a message to another place at an extremely fast speed, or we can use special magical weapons to achieve the transmission of information. But if you want to cultivate to the realm of spirit wander, this is not something that anyone can do. You must work hard, have talent, and have the opportunity to do so. As he spoke, Purin's thin hand took out a mobile phone from his sleeve, shook it, and continued, but now, any ordinary person can do this through the power of technology. Purin put the mobile phone in front of him and sighed slightly. Nowadays, the power of technology is extremely developed, especially the emergence of various weapons, which have made the magical weapons that we cultivators are most proud of much inferior. You Taoist cultivators have worked hard for more than 10 years to cultivate to the realm of flying swords. They can kill a person in 10 steps and travel thousands of miles without leaving a trace. This should be considered very powerful, right? But now, with a gun in their hands, they can also kill a person in 10 steps and travel thousands of miles without leaving a trace. Some people even press a remote control, and in a distant place, blood will flow like a river and people will be plunged into misery and suffering. This is much more powerful than our powerful magical weapons. Purin stared at Li Yundong and asked, genuinely, you said that what we can do after a lifetime of hard cultivation, others can do without practicing. Then why do you think they still cultivate? Li Yundong was stunned when he heard this. He secretly felt that Master Purin was right. He sighed and said, Master Purin, you're right. It's not only the cultivation world, but also Chinese martial arts and medical skills. The way of cultivation is nothing more than martial arts and medicine. Medicine carries the Tao, and martial arts defend the Tao. Unfortunately, they have almost all been lost now. Purin immediately asked, then, genuinely, since ordinary people can do what we can do without cultivation, why do you think we cultivators still cultivate? We might as well not cultivate. Li Yundong immediately retorted without thinking, no. I don't agree with this. There was a hint of a smile in Purin's eyes. He asked, why? Li Yundong said, when Buddhism talks about cultivation, it pays attention to the process of cultivation, not the final result. It focuses on the meaning of walking and experiencing. Buddhist cultivation is to achieve self-breakthrough and transcendence in the process of continuous cultivation, so as to transcend the mortal world and return to the natural world, and finally become a Buddha. Similarly, Taoist cultivation is also called cultivation. It focuses on seeking the true self, getting rid of the false and retaining the true. Then what is the true self, what is the false, and what is the true self? These days, my feeling of cultivation is that the young spirit is the true self, and everything else is hypocritical. Li Yundong faced the highly respected Master Purin and said with confidence, ordinary people can do what we cultivators can do without cultivation, but that refers to the means of killing people. We cultivators choose to cultivate or cultivate, but we don't cultivate to learn the means of killing people. We cultivate to transcend the shackles of this world and jump out of the shackles of birth, old age, illness, and death. Ordinary people will only be trapped in prosperity in decline, honor and disgrace, birth, old age, illness, and death, but we have long surpassed this. As long as our young spirit exists, we will be the same as heaven and earth, shining as the sun and the moon. Transcending life, old age, illness, and death, transcending the difficulties of the mortal world, this is the goal of us cultivators. At the end of his speech, Li Yundong's voice was impassioned and sonorous, and his expression was high-spirited and vigorous. He was really looking forward to flying around, looking heroic and heroic. Hearing this, Master Purin praised loudly and clapped his hands. Well said. He clapped his hands, and at this time, another person came out from the back of the meditation room. He was also an old monk in a golden cassock. The old monk's face was wrinkled, and his eyebrows were extremely long. The tips of his eyebrows were so white that they almost reached his cheekbones. Master Purin smiled at the old monk and said, "Now you can rest assured, right? Such a powerful magical weapon can be handed over to him, right?" The old monk smiled and did not answer. He put his palms together and bowed to Li Yundong, asking, "Almsgiver, may I ask, if it were you, how would you help our cultivation world regain its former glory in the future?" Li Yundong did not dare to neglect him. He quickly got up and returned the salute. He smiled slightly and said, "Make good karma and plant good causes everywhere. In the future, we will naturally be able to grow into a forest of good fruits." Seeing that Li Yundong's answer was ambiguous and cunning, the old monk chuckled and asked, "Generally, if you encounter evil people who want to harm our cultivation world in the future, what will you do?" Li Yundong said without hesitation, "Of course I will get rid of evil and defend the Tao." The old monk narrowed his eyes and asked, "But if this person is an acquaintance of yours, what will you do?" This question immediately made Li Yundong vigilant. He turned to look at Master Purin and asked, "Who is this master?" The old monk smiled slightly and said, "This is Abbot Xincheng of Jinshan Temple." Li Yundong bowed and said, "Abbot Xincheng, I wonder who this acquaintance of yours is?" Xincheng smiled and said, "Is it important who it is?" Li Yundong became more and more vigilant. He thought to himself, "Is this guy trying to trick me and set me up? If it's someone else, it's fine. But if it's a girl, I'll slap you in the face." Li Yundong frowned and said, "Of course it's important. If it's someone I love, I will never do it. Moreover, I believe that my loved one will not do such a thing. Even if she wants to do it, I will stop her." Xincheng chuckled and said, "It's not that serious. Almsgiver Li, you are overthinking it. Who doesn't know that you are a lover who loves beauties more than your country? I just want to ask, if this person is someone you know, what will you do? Will he be biased to protect him?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "I will first find out the truth of the matter. If there is such a thing, I will deal with it impartially." Xincheng smiled with satisfaction and turned to Purin and nodded. Purin chuckled and took out a purple gold glass bowl from his sleeve. He said, "Almsgiver Li, just now Du Fei called me and told me why you came. Although this old monk doesn't know what you need this alms bowl for, this old monk believes that you have a noble character and a kind heart. You won't use this magic treasure to do anything evil. Moreover, since you are in such a hurry to use it, there might be something important. Therefore, this old monk will transfer this magic treasure to you." Li Yundong was overjoyed and respectfully took the Buddhist powerful magical weapon with both hands. After taking it, he thought for a moment and said, "But, Master Purin, I still have one more thing to ask." Purin smiled and said, "Almsgiver Li, please speak your mind." Li Yundong said, "I also want to ask Master Purin how to set up the Bafang demon subduing formation." Purin was slightly surprised. Bafang demon subduing formation? Almsgiver Li, do you know that this is the most precious formation of our Shiyuan temple? For 800 years, it has never been leaked. But Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he thought to himself, "Oh no, I got the magical weapon, but there is a problem with the formation. What should I do?" But when he heard Purin's last sentence, it seemed that there was a turning point. He quickly asked, "But what?" Sorry for the late update. To quickly find this site, please search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Chapter 449. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Purin looked at Li Yundong and said slowly. "However, I still want to hear from you, Jinren. Why do you want to learn this Bafang demon subduing formation?" Li Yundong knew that it was impossible for him to not explain the reason clearly. If he asked Purin to teach him the layout of such an important magic formation, it would be no different from a fool's talk. Moreover, he didn't expect Purin to teach him such an important magic formation. As long as Purin was willing to help him set up one in the place he wanted, it would be fine. Li Yundong told him about the grudges between the Fox Zen school and Yanfang, as well as his own plans. Finally, he said, Master Purin, as the saying goes, don't lie in front of a real person. I must catch Yanfang, but I won't kill her. After thinking about it, I can only ask Master Purin for help. Please teach me the Bafang demon subduing formation and trap Yanfang. I will definitely thank you in the future. Purin lowered his eyes and there was no expression on his face. After thinking for a long time, he said, Benefactorly, I already understand what you said. However, this Bafang demon subduing formation is too important. I can't make the decision to teach it to you. Li Yundong had expected this, but he was not discouraged. He said, Then can Master Purin mobilize the Bafang demon subduing formation to help me catch Yanfang? Purin still shook his head. No. Li Yundong frowned and asked, Why? Purin said, Yanfang is an inner disciple of the Linggong sect, a branch of the Jingyi school, the first Taoist sect. She became famous very early, and all the cultivators of the older generation in the world know her name. She is also a famous person in the Taoist cultivation world. If I mobilize the Bafang demon subduing formation to catch her, it will give Jingyi school an excuse. At that time, there will be frequent fights between Buddhism and Taoism. If it's just a fight, it's fine. If the country intervenes, it will not be a blessing for the cultivation world. Li Yundong looked disappointed. Are you going to sit back and watch Yanfang be lawless? Purin put his palms together and sighed. Amitba, I can't help you with this matter. However, benefactorly, you don't have to worry. As the saying goes, there will always be a way out. You already have the burning thumb pot in your hand. I think when the time comes, you will definitely have a wonderful idea to deal with Yanfang. Li Yunyang smiled bitterly in his heart. Are you kidding me? Not only does the yang spirit escape fast, but it also quickly turns into countless divine senses to escape in all directions. If I miss one of them, it will be a failure. How can I have any strange tricks to deal with Yanfang? It's fine if this old monk doesn't want to lend it to me, but he actually used such words to brush me off. Purin saw that Li Yundong's face was full of disappointment and a bitter smile. He thought for a moment and said, benefactorly, in fact, you should think about why I would borrow this burning thumb pot at this time. Li Yundong suddenly had an idea and asked, Master Purin, do you also want to? Purin turned his face and looked at Master Xian Cheng, the abbot of Jinshan Temple. The two of them smiled at the same time. Purin bowed and said, Amitba, benefactorly is very perceptive. It's just that you want to resolve the grievances between the sects, while we want to catch a big devil. Li Yundong asked tentatively, Masters, may I ask which big devil you want to catch? Purin shook his head. Almsgiver Li, the law must not be passed on to others. This matter cannot be said. But you'll know when the time comes. Li Yundong was a little unwilling and asked again, may I ask when it will be? Purin thought for a moment and said, next month, on the 8th day of the 12th lunar month. Laba Festival. Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, but he quickly thought of something and asked, when is the Taoist assembly? Purin and Xian Cheng looked at each other again. They smiled at the same time and chanted the name of Buddha in unison, saying, it's on the 8th day of the 12th lunar month. Li Yundong was shocked. Could it be that these two old monks wanted to subdue demons at the Taoist assembly? No, the participants of the Taoist assembly are all cultivators of various sections. What kind of demons and ghosts are these two old monks going to catch? Don't tell me you're going to capture my sex vixen. Thinking of this, Li Yundong was slightly shocked, but he quickly thought, I don't think so. If they wanted to catch her, they would have done it a long time ago. Why wait until the Taoist assembly to catch her? Li Yundong couldn't help but ask again, Masters, are you going to the Taoist assembly to catch some big devil? Purin lowered his eyes and said, "The Buddha said, it can't be said, it can't be said." Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh angrily. "Master Purin, why are you being so mysterious? What are you going to do?" Purin still shook his head and said, "As the saying goes, if the emperor is not secretive, he will lose his minister. If the minister is not secretive, he will lose his life. Benefactorly, don't ask any more questions. Since you already have the burning thumb pot, you should rest assured. Maybe when the time comes, we can work together to subdue the demons." After that, he chanted the name of Buddha again and clapped his hands. After a while, a greeting monk came out from the end of the corridor. Purin said, "Phagian, take Benefactorly to the guest room to rest. I'm a little tired." "Well, he's asking me to leave." Li Yundong had no choice but to bend down and say goodbye to Master Purin and Master Xincheng. No matter what, his trip had not been in vain. Although he hadn't gotten the Bafang demon subduing formation, he had finally gotten the burning thumb pot. When the time came, he would finally have a little confidence to capture Yan Fang's yang spirit. But when Li Yundong followed the greeting monk back, he was very troubled. Judging from the situation just now, it's obvious that Jinshan Temple and Shiyuan Temple have joined hands to catch a big devil. But what kind of devil is it? Judging from the fact that I broke into Shiyuan Temple and let go of the two big golden snakes, these monks seem to be very intolerant of outsiders. Otherwise, why would they want to refine these two big golden snakes? What do these two snake demons have to do with them? Why do these big monks want to make life difficult for these two snake demons? Since snake demons can't be tolerated in the world, what about a fox spirit like Su Chan? Is she also not tolerated in the world? Logically speaking, throughout the past 5,000 years, fox spirits have done more harm to the world than snake spirits. But from his contact with Master Purin of Shiyuan Temple, he didn't seem to show any resistance to Su Chan and the others. Instead, he tried to persuade him to do good. Moreover, what kind of devil is Su Chan? However, if these big monks really want to catch Su Chan, what should I do? Thinking of this, Li Yundong suddenly stopped, his face surprisingly solemn. The greeting monk, who was leading the way in front, looked back in confusion and asked, "Benefactorly, what's the matter?" Li Yundong's face was cold, and his eyebrows were full of murderous intent. He said in a cold voice, "It's nothing. You go first. I want to see the surrounding scenery alone." The greeting monk saw that Li Yundong's face was not good. He wanted to ask a few questions, but he was forced by Li Yundong's threatening murderous aura and didn't dare to open his mouth. However, he was worried that Li Yundong would cause trouble, so he casually answered and then hurried to the backyard to report the situation to the abbot. Li Yundong didn't know what the greeting monk was thinking. He just stood there alone, his eyes surprisingly cold. The question that had popped up in his mind before was not because he wanted to help Su Chan or not. In his opinion, no matter who in the world wanted to harm his girl, whether it was Buddha Tathagata or Guanyin Bodhisattva, there was only one thing he could do: beat them. But the question was if the other party wanted to catch someone. Who was this devil? Obviously, it wasn't Yan Fang. If it was someone else from the Fox Zen school, what should he do? If they really caught Su Chan, why would they do that? These questions poured into Li Yundong's mind one after another, making his heart feel a little heavy for a moment. Although he was surrounded by antique temples and the scenery was beautiful and elegant, Li Yundong was not in the mood to appreciate it at all. While he was thinking about it, he suddenly heard the voices of two women talking not far away. The content of their conversation immediately attracted Li Yundong's attention. "Hey, Xia, why are the group you lead this time full of strange people? I've seen strange Japanese people, but I've never seen such strange Japanese people. You tell me, instead of taking pictures of the scenery, they're taking pictures of the talismans in the woods, and then they're taking pictures of the monks in the Hall of Great Strength. Don't you think it's weird?" Lon Lon, you haven't seen anything weirder. Did you see those Japanese people pointing at the sutra depository of Shiyuan Temple just now? Yes. Do you know what they're talking about? I'm not as good at Japanese as you are, so I don't understand much. Xia, tell me about it. Hey, those Japanese people pointed at the sutra depository of Buddhist scriptures to the little girl they were taking with them. They said, Tachibana Wakako, look, this is the best preserved sutra depository of Buddhist temples in South China. There are rich varieties of scriptures in it, and the complete versions are the best in South China. It is also famous throughout Asia. Then the little girl said, do you know what it is? I don't know. Tell me quickly. Don't keep me guessing. The little girl asked, but why are the other temples that are much older than Shiyuan Temple not as rich as Shiyuan Temple? Yes, this little girl's question is very interesting. Although Shiyuan Temple is old, there are temples in our country that are much older than this. Let me finish. Then the old man said, Tachibana Wakako, there was a terrible catastrophe in this country 40 years ago. This catastrophe was no less than the burning of books and burying of scholars in the Qin dynasty. In this catastrophe, many temples and Taoist temples on the mainland of China were destroyed, and a large number of scriptures and books were burned. At that time, the abbot of Shiyuan Temple, Master Mingkai, led the monks to fight back and guard the temple gate day and night. Only then did they protect the scriptures of Shiyuan Temple. TSK, this Japanese guy knows a lot about our country's history. I don't even know these things. Yes, I often lead teams to Shiyuan Temple. Even I don't know about it, but these Japanese people are so familiar with it. Don't you think it's strange? And there's something even stranger. There's more. Tell me quickly. Hey, the old man said, in a while, it will be the famous Taoist assembly of the Taoists in China. At that time, we have to go and have a look and meet the cultivation masters of the Taoists. Lon Lon, what do you think the background of these Japanese people is? I seem to have seen some of them wearing Buddhist robes at my residence. Gee, what is a Taoist assembly? Aren't these people a little too strange? The more Li Yundong listened, the more he felt strange and shocked. Especially when he heard the words, Taoist assembly, he finally couldn't help it. He walked behind the two women who were whispering to each other and said in a deep voice, hello, may I ask? As soon as he spoke, the two women were startled. They both turned around at the same time. The three of them looked at each other and were all shocked at the same time. Li Yundong and the two women blurted out in unison, it's you. I went out to do something. I'll update one chapter before returning to Shanghai, and another chapter will be updated in the evening in Shanghai. To quickly find this site, please search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Chapter 450. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. The two women standing in front of Li Yundong were none other than the tour guide Lu Xia and her friend Lon Lon, who had harassed Li Yundong before. When Lu Xia suddenly saw Li Yundong appear behind her, she was also shocked. She involuntarily took a step back and stammered, are you a ghost? You don't make a sound when you walk. Lon Lon also pulled her arm and whispered nervously, Xia, is this guy here to settle the score with us? Although her voice was low, it couldn't escape Li Yundong's ears. Li Yundong frowned and asked, what score? What score? Ever since Lon Lon had seen Li Yundong's inhuman skills and performance last time, she had been afraid of this mysterious boy. In addition, she had urged Lu Xia to post the video on the internet. Originally, she wanted to expose Li Yundong, but she didn't expect that their video would be automatically deleted a few days after it was exposed. For this matter, Lon Lon even went to the customer service of the video network, but her complaints and information were like stones sinking into the sea, and there was no reply. After a while, Lon Lon and Lu Xia finally confirmed one thing: Li Yundong was very likely to have a very powerful background, so the video that exposed him was quickly deleted. Originally, Lon Lon, who had thought that she had provoked a powerful person, lived in fear all day long. She was afraid that the other party would come to her door and take her to another province. But after a while, Lon Lon found that her life was still calm and peaceful, and she slowly forgot about this matter. But suddenly, Lon Lon found that this boy had appeared in front of her again. How could she not be frightened? Lon Lon grabbed Lu Xia's arm and shouted at Li Yundong, "I posted the video. I will take responsibility for what I did. It has nothing to do with Xia." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Video? What video?" When Lon Lon and Lu Xia heard this, they immediately complained to themselves, "Oh no," he confessed without being beaten. "It turns out that this guy doesn't know about the video." Li Yundong also quickly remembered. It turned out that the last time someone had posted the video of him fighting with Master Feikong on the internet, it was these two women who had done it. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He hadn't expected that his casual question would make the other party feel guilty and confess without being pressed. It could be considered as solving one of his doubts. He deliberately asked with a straight face, "Don't you know that your behavior is an invasion of others' privacy?" Lu Xia's eyes were timid, but she deliberately put on a fierce look and said, "Wasn't the video deleted later?" Li Yundong glared at her. "Do you know what kind of trouble this video will bring me?" Although Lon Lon was not tall, she was quite shrewd and righteous. She put her hands on her hips and stood in front of Lu Xia, shouting, "What are you doing? So what if you have power and influence? If you come any closer, I'm going to scream." Li Yundong looked at her and saw that although this female tour guide was good-looking, she was far inferior to any of the women around him. He was usually surrounded by beautiful women, but he was still clean. Could it be that in this Buddhist temple, he had to do something to her? Wouldn't that be ridiculous? Li Yundong couldn't help laughing out loud. He was not in the mood to argue with the two tour guides. After laughing for a while, he asked, "I won't pursue this matter, but you have to tell me what you said just now. Just now, you said that a few Japanese people were talking in private, right?" Lu Xia and Lon Lon looked at each other. Seeing that Li Yundong did not pursue this matter, they became weaker. Lu Xia nodded and said, "Yes, did you eavesdrop on our conversation just now?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "You two were talking so loudly. It's impossible for me not to hear it." Lu Xia pushed Lon Lon angrily and whispered, "It's all your fault. You have such a loud voice. This is great. You've attracted this guy." Lon Lon also said angrily, "Was my voice that loud? You've always been the one who talked the most, okay?" Lu Xia said angrily, "You were the one who started it." Seeing that the two women were complaining to each other, Li Yundong hurriedly asked, "Don't be in a hurry to complain. Tell me where those Japanese people are first, or you can take me to have a look." Lu Xia looked at Li Yundong warily. "What do you want to do? As tour guides, we have the obligation to protect the privacy of tourists." Li Yundong glanced at Lu Xia. He had always had a bad impression of this female tour guide who worshipped foreign things, but at this time, he still said patiently, "The Taoist Assembly is a grand event held once every 4 years by China's Taoism. The Laba Festival will be held next month. These Japanese tourists said that they were going to the Taoist Assembly. I don't think they have any good intentions. After all, you are also descendants of Wuxia. You can't help the Japanese, right?" Lu Xia thought about the behavior of these Japanese people before and believed what Li Yundong had said. She raised her eyebrows and asked, "What do you want to do with them?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Nothing. I just want to take a look." Lu Xia and Lon Lon looked at each other and nodded slightly. Lon Lon glanced at Li Yunyang and said worriedly, "You're not a nationalistic youth, are you? Don't hit people." You can beat people to your heart's content, but I'm unlucky. Li Yundong chuckled and said, as long as they don't cause trouble, why would I go looking for trouble? Lon Lon muttered in a low voice, then turned around and led the way. Lu Xia also nodded to Li Yundong and said, come with me. Don't talk later. If you want to know anything, tell me in a low voice and I'll ask around for you. Li Yundong smiled and said, don't worry, I won't cause you any trouble. Only then did Lu Xia feel relieved. She quickly caught up with Lon Lon and walked side by side with her. The two female tour guides were talking in a low voice. From time to time, they would look back at Li Yundong, but when Li Yundong looked at them, they quickly dodged his gaze. Li Yundong walked through the corridor with white walls and black tiles and arrived in front of the Arhat Hall. Sure enough, he saw 4 people pointing at the Arhat Hall. There were 3 men and a girl among them. Li Yundong looked over and saw that among the 3 men, an old man was wearing a grey suit with an ochre tie on his chest. There was a golden cherry blossom on his chest. His hair was grey at the temples, and the wrinkles on his face were extremely deep. His eyebrows were extremely dignified. It was obvious that he had been in a high position for a long time. There were 2 young men next to him. One of them was a little short. Although he was wearing a mixed suit, his clothes were luxurious and he had an extraordinary temperament. He was holding a handheld camera in his hand. He turned a deaf ear to the sign prohibiting filming in the temple and kept shooting around. Next to this man stood a tall and burly man. This man had his back to Li Yundong and was talking to the little girl, so Li Yundong could not see his appearance clearly. But when Li Yundong looked at this man's back, he felt that this man stood there like a towering mountain, exuding an awe-inspiring aura. As soon as Li Yundong's gaze fell on the back of this tall man, the man's back straightened. He immediately turned around and stared at Li Yundong. This stare was amazing. Li Yundong suddenly had an illusion. It was as if he had encountered a ferocious and terrifying beast in the jungle. All the hair on his body stood on end. At this time, Li Yundong's cultivation had already reached the highest realm of the Yang spirit. It could be said that he was proficient in the aura all over his body. He could hide it in the internal aperture in an instant or burst it out in front of him in an instant. He was like a divine dragon, sometimes hiding under the earth and sometimes soaring above the sky. In the past, Li Yundong didn't know how to restrain his aura, so wherever he went, his huge aura would attract people's attention. In addition, his aura was extremely masculine. When women approached him, they would unconsciously attract each other and have a strong affection for him. When men saw him, they would subconsciously repel him and have a strong resistance to him. This situation had also caused Li Yundong a lot of trouble. As Li Yundong's cultivation improved, the aura he restrained had become less and less. Except for his heroic spirit, his appearance was no different from that of an ordinary person. But at this time, when the Japanese suddenly looked at him, Li Yundong felt an extremely terrifying and dangerous aura coming at him. This sense of threat was even stronger than that of Yu Sheng of the Chuanjin dragon sect. The aura hidden deep in Li Yundong's body was suddenly aroused by the other party. The aura all over his body was majestic. Lu Xia and Lan Lan, who were standing beside Li Yundong, suddenly felt as if there was a pair of invisible hands pushing them away, almost causing them to stagger. Lu Xia and Lan Lan looked at Li Yundong in surprise, only to see that the corners of Li Yundong's clothes were fluttering without any wind, and his black hair was standing on end. He was like a fierce tiger in the jungle, and his mane was standing on end. As soon as the aura in Li Yundong's body burst out, the Japanese man's eyes also burst out. Countless black patterns quickly spread out from his neck and quickly climbed to his face. Black aura kept gushing out from his palms. This aura lingered in his palms and did not dissipate, like thick ink condensed by countless ghosts. Li Yundong could even see the ferocious face revealed in the thick ink. As soon as the 2 men looked at each other, their auras became a little uncontrollable, especially the tall Japanese man. He straightened his back and slightly bent his body like a cheetah. He stared at Li Yundong like a falcon, his eyes covetous, and his whole body was eager to fight. Li Yundong saw that the other party's aura was cold and powerful, and his eyes were full of hostility, as if he was ready to attack at any time. His eyes narrowed slightly, and his expression did not change. The aura surging all over his body was much more violent and vigorous than before. He stood still and looked at the other party calmly. There was thunder in his heart, but his face was as calm as a lake. Seeing that the two were about to fight, the old Japanese man next to him suddenly scolded and said something quickly in Japanese. Then the tall Japanese man narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Yundong for a while. He reluctantly withdrew his aura, then turned around and stood respectfully behind the old man. He lowered his eyebrows and looked humble. It was impossible to tell that this man had been able to release such a cold and domineering aura of Jinchi just now. As soon as he turned around, the little girl behind him was revealed. She was about 13 or 14 years old. Although she looked young, she was quite tall and was already about 1.65 meters tall. She was wearing a lavender kimono with 100 flowers on it and white socks on her feet. Her face was delicate and pretty. She looked at Li Yundong curiously, then gently pulled the sleeve of the tall Japanese man beside her and asked in a low voice, "Shinshu, who is this person?" Shinshu stared at Li Yundong closely. He bowed slightly and said in a deep voice, "Miss Tachibana Wakako, I don't know who this person is, but he is a master." Tachibana Wakako raised her head and giggled at the old man beside her. "Master Xinyan, are there also masters in mainland China?" To quickly find this site, please search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Chapter 451. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Li Yundong saw that the little girl was smiling innocently, but he didn't understand Japanese, so he didn't know that the little girl had said something extremely insulting. But what he didn't know was that the dignified Master Xinyan then said something even more insulting. Master Xinyan smiled at Tachibana Wakako and said in Japanese with a Kyoto accent, "Tachibana Wakako, as early as 300 or 400 years ago, there were masters on this continent. At that time, whether it was Buddhism or Taoism, there were endless heroes in China, far from what we can compare with. But since the Qing dynasty, the Han people on this continent have been ridden by the minority Manchu people. Since then, their cultivation world has been going downhill. Until modern times, the Chinese cultivation world has completely fallen to the bottom, and its power is far inferior to ours. Even the entire Chinese cultivation world can't compare to the power of our Ragoino Tantric sect. Moreover, think about it, how powerful can a sect that can't even protect its own ancestral court and Tibetan Sutra be? How powerful can a sect that can't get the support of the state and even the common people don't want to believe in and support it be? How powerful could the disciples taught by such a sect be? In the 7th year of Hirohito, our Mount Koya was appointed by the Mikado to be conferred the title of Master Konghai. Since then, Master Konghai has founded the Shingon sect. From 816 AD to the present, it has not changed. Moreover, no matter what kind of war we suffer, no matter how the dynasty changes, our Mount Koya remains unmoved. Only a sect like ours can produce real masters. These Chinese sects that have suffered for 200 years. Humph, if you want to say that there are masters in Shiyuan Temple, I'm willing to believe it. As for other sects, even if they can produce masters, they are fake masters. In front of our masters, they can't withstand a single blow. Tachibana Wakako nodded as if she understood, but then she quickly glanced at Li Yundong and said, "What if Shinshu said this person is a master?" Great Master Xinyan also glanced at Li Yundong. He nodded slightly and said, "Well, this person's eyesight is extremely strong, and he is full of energy. He can restrain his aura, but his explosive power is extremely strong. What's even rarer is that he is very young, the age where heroes come from. However, I think the aura in his body is very strange. It's not like the cultivation aura of the various Chinese sects that I'm familiar with. Therefore, I don't think he's a cultivator from any of the major cultivation sects in China. The Chinese cultivation continent can't produce such an expert. Tachibana Wakako couldn't help but look at him curiously again. She asked, which sect does this person belong to? Is he from China? As she said this, she whispered to Shinsu, can you find out his background? Hearing her words, Shinsu's expression changed. She raised her drooping eyelids, and an aggressive light immediately shot out of her eyes toward Li Yunyang. His figure also changed from a submissive servant to a great expert with an extraordinary aura in the blink of an eye. Shinsu looked at Li Yundong. Li Yundong seemed to have sensed it and also looked at him. When their eyes met in the air, it was as if Mars had hit the earth, and it seemed that countless blazing sparks could be stirred up in the air. Shinsu! Xinyan shouted in a dignified voice, step back. Shinsu immediately lowered his head and bowed respectfully. I'm sorry, Great Master Xinyan. I was impulsive. Xinyan patted Tachibana Wakako's head kindly and said softly, Tachibana Wakako, have you forgotten our agreement? This time, we are here to collect some information about the Chinese cultivation world, not to make trouble. This person's cultivation seems to be from the Chinese Taoist school. If that's the case, he should go to the Chinese Taoist assembly next month. If he goes, you'll know his background by then. Tachibana Wakako smiled childishly and said with a smile, okay then. As she spoke, she said to Li Yundong in Japanese, hey, you have to go to the Taoist assembly. Li Yundong, who had been standing to one side, was confused. He saw them talking quickly in Japanese. Finally, the little girl said something to him with a smile, but he had no idea what she was talking about. Just as he was about to turn his head to ask Lu Xia, he saw the old Japanese man in the lead shout something to the Japanese man who was constantly taking pictures. Then the Japanese man respectfully put away the camera, and they turned around and left slowly. Before leaving, Tachibana Wakako looked back at Li Yundong and shouted, you have to go. Shinsu glanced at Li Yundong and then said to Tachibana Wakako, Miss Tachibana Wakako, you can actually not pay attention to this person. Tachibana Wakako looked at Shinsu in confusion and asked, why? Shinsu smiled slightly and said, although this person's cultivation is strong, there is still a certain gap between him and me. He is even worse than you. Tachibana Wakako said, not as good as you. If you fight with him, what are your chances of winning? Shinsu thought for a moment and said proudly, 70%. Tachibana Wakako said with a face full of disappointment, well, that's too boring. This is the first master I've seen in mainland China. Shinsu laughed and said, Miss Tachibana Wakako, just now Master Xinyan said that there are no masters in mainland China. Tachibana Wakako nodded and said, I see. After that, she turned her head and shouted at Li Yundong, hey, if you can't beat Shinsu, you don't have to go to the Taoist assembly. I don't want to see you. After shouting, Tachibana Wakako followed Xinyan, Shinsu, and the others all the way. Li Yundong watched them leave in confusion. He turned his head and asked Lu Xia with a confused face, what did they say? Didn't you say that you would help me translate? Why didn't I see you translate? At this time, Lu Xia was already dumbfounded. From what she had heard just now, what these Japanese people had said was like a fairy tale. What Regoino, what cultivation sects, what masters and fake masters. What the hell was all this nonsense? Was it a Xianxia TV series? Lu Xia was in a daze. It was not until Li Yundong pushed her that she came to her senses. She stared at Li Yundong with her big black eyes as if she was looking at a visitor from outer space. She thought to herself, could it be that this boy is the legendary strange man with special gifts? As soon as this thought came to her mind, she remembered all kinds of strange things she had seen on this boy before. She couldn't help but believe it, and her heart became more and more shocked. Li Yundong saw that the woman was staring at him blankly, as if she had seen a ghost. He couldn't help frowning and saying, "Hey, I'm talking to you. What were those Japanese talking about just now?" Lu Xia calmed down. She recalled what the Japanese had said before and translated it to Li Yundong sentence by sentence. Li Yundong listened carefully. At first, he nodded repeatedly, but when he heard Lu Xia translate Tachibana Wakako's words, "Are there masters in mainland China?" Li Yundong suddenly flew into a rage. Li Yundong said angrily, "How dare a little girl speak so arrogantly? Do you really think that there are no masters in Wuxia?" But when Lu Xia finished translating Master Xinyan's words, although Li Yundong was even angrier, he calmed down. The young cultivator pursed his lips tightly, and his masculine and handsome face was full of contemplation. His eyebrows were tightly furrowed, and there was a deep and oppressive aura between his eyebrows. The air around him seemed to freeze. Lu Xia, who was beside him, felt as if there was a big stone pressing down on her chest, and she could not breathe. After a while, Li Yundong turned to look at Lu Xia and asked coldly, "That's all?" They didn't say anything else. When Lu Xia saw him speak, the surrounding air seemed to begin to flow, and the big stone on her chest was lifted. Lu Xia took a deep breath and said, "It's not over yet. Just now, this little girl said something to you." Li Yundong asked with a sullen face, "What did she say?" Lu Xia looked at Li Yundong timidly and carefully translated the conversation between Tachibana Wakako and Shinsu before she left to Li Yundong. Before she could finish speaking, before Li Yundong could get angry, Lan Lan, who was next to him, also got angry. She said angrily, "The Japanese really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth." After Li Yundong heard this, unexpectedly, he did not fly into a rage as Lu Xia had imagined. Instead, he raised his head and laughed angrily. As he laughed, the aura all over his body surged like a tide, like stormy waves, like a surging river. As soon as Li Yundong laughed, all the bronze bells in the entire Shiyuan temple rang in unison, making a buzzing sound. This sound was mixed with Li Yundong's loud and amazing laughter and went straight to the sky. Lu Xia, Lan Lan, and the other tourists covered their ears in pain. Some of the weaker ones even squatted on the ground. Their facial features were twisted into a ball. At this time, Xinyan, Shinsu, Tachibana Wakako, and the others, who had already walked out of the Shiyuan temple, heard the voice. They suddenly stopped and turned their heads to look back at the same time. They saw a straight and undispersed aura rushing into the sky from the Shiyuan temple. This aura, accompanied by a burst of laughter, went straight to the 9th layer of the sky, stirred up the wind and clouds in the sky, and changed the color of the sky. Tachibana Wakako looked curiously at the rolling clouds in the sky. She gently pulled Shinsu's sleeve and said, "Shinsu, is this person inviting you to fight?" Shinsu's eyes narrowed, and his face became strangely serious. Xinyan looked at the changing sky and listened to the proud laughter. At first, he didn't think much of it. Young people are young people after all, and they can't keep their cool. But he listened to the laughter for 5 minutes without any sign of stopping. It was like waves, one wave after another, one wave after another, one wave after another, and each wave was stronger than the last. At this time, Xinyan was finally moved. He opened his eyes slightly and was silent for a long time. After about 5 minutes, when the laughter finally stopped, he slowly let out a long breath. Xinyan turned his head and said to Shinsu, "Shinsu, this person is a strong opponent for you." Shinsu didn't refute. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, revealing a smile. "We won't know until we fight." With an innocent face, Tachibana Wakako clapped her hands happily and said, "Okay, it turns out that I underestimated him. There will be a good show at the Taoist assembly." She giggled and turned to Master Xinyan. "Master Xinyan, I think there are also masters in mainland China." Xinyan didn't even look back. He smiled and said, "Is there? You'll know when the time comes." To quickly find this website, please search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Chapter 452. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Li Yundong laughed out loud. On the one hand, he was expressing his contempt and disdain for the arrogant words of these Japanese. On the other hand, he was formally inviting them to fight. But after laughing for a while, he waited where he was for a long time. He didn't see these Japanese turn back to fight with him. Li Yundong knew that they must have left. He sneered to himself, turned his head, and apologized to Lu Xia and Lan Lan, who were in pain. Then, he quickly left Shiyuan Temple. After he left, 2 old monks walked out of the backyard of Arhat Hall. They were Xian Cheng and Purin. The 2 old monks looked at each other and chanted the name of Buddha in unison. Xian Cheng sighed and said, "Jindan descends to the world, and Wisdom King descends to the world. Thunder Retribution descends from the sky, and all the foxes go down the mountain. The temple bells ring together, and the demons fight. The black fox reappears, and the world is in chaos. Purin, your disciples' words are really accurate." Purin also looked worried. He sighed and said, "Amitabha, I hope the cultivation world can get through this tribulation." The 2 old monks sighed in unison, and the deep wrinkles on their faces became more and more crisscrossed. After Li Yundong left Shiyuan Temple, he walked quickly and aimlessly all the way. He thought of what the Japanese had said, and his heart seemed to be blocked by something, which made him feel very uncomfortable. But when Li Yundong thought about it carefully, he had to admit that the old Japanese man's words were indeed very reasonable. How powerful can a sect that can't even protect its own ancestral court and Tibetan sutras be? How powerful can a sect that can't get the support of the state, and even ordinary people don't want to believe in and support it? How powerful can a disciple from such a sect be? These 3 sentences were like daggers that pierced through Li Yundong's chest. They made him angry, but also made him feel a trace of sadness and helplessness. No wonder Master Purin asked me about the true meaning of cultivation in such a serious manner. No wonder Zi Yuan sighed over and over again about the calamity encountered by the cultivation world. Li Yundong stood on the bustling street, surrounded by pedestrians and heavy traffic. However, he felt that there was a dead silence around him, and there was a lifeless atmosphere everywhere. He even felt that the faces of everyone on the side of the road were gray and lifeless. Li Yundong clenched his fists, and his eyes were full of unwillingness and anger. He thought to himself, "These Japanese look down on our Chinese cultivation world. When the Taoist assembly begins, I'll let them see if there are any masters in our mainland." As soon as he thought of this, he quickly walked to a place where there was no one around. Then, he turned into a beam of cyan light and quickly flew toward Tiannan City. When Li Yundong returned to his home in Tiannan City, it was already evening. After entering the house, Li Yundong saw the little foxes chattering together, happily counting the banknotes, and then dividing the spoils one by one. The little foxes originally wanted to divide the money in private, but when they saw Li Yundong enter the room with a cold face, they suddenly felt like thieves who had been caught red-handed. They all looked at each other guiltily. Lingyu braced herself to stand up and said with a forced smile, "Leader, you're back. We are counting the money we made today." "Ah, by the way, leader, do you know how much money we made?" Although Li Yundong was depressed, he returned home and faced the little beauties who were smiling like flowers. No matter how unhappy he was, the anger in his heart dissipated a lot at this time. He suppressed the unhappiness in his heart, smiled faintly, and said, "What's the matter? Did you make money today?" When the little foxes saw Li Yundong smiling, they immediately became excited. They rushed to Li Yundong with a smile and said, "Leader, you can't look down on us anymore. We made a lot of money today." Li Yundong chuckled and was about to speak when he suddenly saw Su Chan poking her head out of her room in surprise. "Yundong, you're back." After that, the little girl ran toward Li Yundong barefoot, like a swallow returning to the woods, and threw herself into his arms. Li Yundong hugged Su Chan tightly. He rubbed the girl's hair with tenderness in his heart and said with a smile, "Did you make any mischief while I was away?" Su Chan rolled her eyes. She thought of the middle-aged man who had thrown down 10,000 yuan and ran out. She felt a little guilty and avoided his gaze. She secretly stuck out her tongue and didn't say anything for a while. Li Yundong was also full of worries, so he didn't notice Su Chan's expression. The little foxes beside him also joined in and said one after another, "Leader, the lady boss took us to make a lot of money today. Look, look." Immediately, one of the little foxes held the money in front of Li Yundong as if they were offering a treasure. Li Yundong took a rough look and saw that there was probably a few thousand yuan. He said with a smile, "Not bad, you made a few thousand yuan on the first day. That's good, it seems that there are quite a lot of guests." His words made the little foxes secretly stick out their tongues. One of them opened her mouth and said, "Just one." Before she could finish saying the word guests, the other little foxes next to her covered her mouth and dragged her to the back. Li Yundong was stunned for a moment, but he didn't take it seriously. He asked casually, "One what?" Ling Yu rolled her eyes and quickly said to smooth things over, "We can make so much money in just one day. Leader, aren't we amazing?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and said, "Do you still want to do business at night? I think you are obsessed with money." After that, he patted the little girl's head and said, "Channer, you did a good job today. You didn't cause me any trouble. Well, you deserve praise. By the way, I saw you dividing the money just now, didn't I? Well, you can divide the money among yourselves. Just take it as a red envelope from me. Don't hand it in." When the little foxes heard this, they immediately cheered in unison, "Long live the leader! Long live the leader!" Li Yundong chuckled, nodded to Su Chan, and then motioned for her to come to his room. The little girl followed Li Yundong to his room uneasily. After entering the door, she rubbed the corner of her clothes with both hands, wondering whether she should tell Li Yundong what had happened today. The little girl was not a fool. Although she had not reacted to what had happened today at first, after thinking about it for a while, she finally understood and confirmed one thing: she had done something wrong and must have caused trouble again. But she had caused trouble. Should she tell Yundong? If she did, Yundong would blame her for causing trouble again. The praise just now would have been in vain. But if she didn't tell him, she would feel that it was not a good thing. It would make her feel very uneasy to keep something hanging in the air. In the blink of an eye, the little girl's mind was racing, but Li Yundong didn't notice her thoughts. He said softly to Su Chan, "Channer, I've borrowed the burning thumb pot. Take a look." As he spoke, he took out the burning thumb pot and held it in front of Su Chan. Su Chan's eyes lit up. She saw that the burning thumb pot was dark green. From a distance, it looked brilliant and beautiful. At first glance, she could tell that it was not an ordinary object. When she got closer, she saw that the light in the room shone on the burning thumb pot, reflecting colorful light. In each different refraction surface of the glass, Su Chan could see her charming face. It was as if the burning thumb pot was a spirit space, reflecting countless versions of herself. For a moment, Su Chan was a little dazed by the exquisite burning thumb pot. She subconsciously reached out to touch it, but as soon as her fingers touched it, her whole body suddenly shook and she quickly retracted her hand as if she had been electrocuted. Li Yundong smiled and said, "What's wrong? What are you afraid of? If you like it, take it and look at it more." Su Chan shook her head like a rattled drum and looked at the glass bowl with envy and fear in her eyes. She said, "No, this burning thumb pot has a lot of Buddhist magic power. I can't touch it. When I touched it just now, my whole body felt like it had been electrocuted. It was very uncomfortable." Li Yundong played with the burning thumb pot in his hand strangely. "Really? Why didn't I feel it?" Su Chan looked at Li Yundong enviously and said, "Yundong, you are a human, so you naturally can't feel it, but I am a fox spirit. This burning thumb pot is a Buddhist magic item. Its Buddhist power is solemn and majestic, and it is specially used to restrain our demon aura. Moreover, colored glass is one of the 7 treasures of Buddhism, and it is also the incarnation of a monk's 1,000-year cultivation. In all the Buddhist scriptures, body and spirit like colored glass is regarded as the highest realm of Buddhist cultivation. The Medicine Master's Colored Glass Buddha's Original Vows Merit Sutra says, "When I get Bodhi in my next life, my body will be like colored glass, clear inside and out, pure and clean." From this, it can be seen that colored glass is the purest thing in the world. Muddy demon bodies like us can't touch it. After hearing this, Li Yundong laughed. He hugged the little girl and intimately rubbed the tip of his nose against her forehead. He said with a smile, "Silly girl, in my opinion, you are the purest and most pure person in the world. As for this." Li Yundong raised the burning thumb pot high with one hand and said with a smile, "This is just a magic item. No matter how important a magic item is, how can it be compared with a person?" Su Chan felt warm in her heart when she heard this. She thought to herself, "Yundong loves me so much, but I can't tell him frankly. Instead, I hide something in my heart. How can I be worthy of Yundong's feelings for me?" Thinking of this, the little girl opened her mouth and was about to tell Li Yundong what had happened today, but Li Yundong held her with one hand and looked at the burning thumb pot. He sighed and said, "Chaner, I only borrowed the burning thumb pot this time, but I didn't get the Bafang demon subduing formation. I don't know if I can catch Yen Fang's yang spirit with this burning thumb pot alone." As he said this, he lowered his head and looked at Su Chan apologetically. He said softly, "But don't worry, I will try my best to help you find your master, Ao Wushuang." Su Chan's words were stopped by Li Yundong again. She nodded obediently and opened her mouth to speak again, but Li Yundong touched her hair and said, "Well, I know what you want to say. Don't say thank you or anything. We don't need to say such polite words. You go out first. I'm going to mobilize my Jinchi and take the burning thumb pot for my own use." Su Chan opened her mouth and said, "But, Yundong, I have something to tell you." Li Yundong asked in confusion, "Is it very important?" Su Chan was stunned for a moment. She lowered her head guiltily and said weakly, "It seems, it's not that important." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Then let's talk about it after I subdue the burning thumb pot. You go out and wait for me." Su Chan looked at Li Yundong hesitantly and finally swallowed the words that were on the tip of her tongue. The little girl thought to herself, "I'd better let Yundong subdue the burning thumb pot first. If I tell him about it and he gets angry, what if it affects his subduing of the magical item?" Thinking of this, Su Chan looked at Li Yundong timidly and said in a low voice, "Well, Yundong, I'm going out." Li Yundong nodded to Su Chan with a smile. After she went out, the smile on Li Yundong's face slowly disappeared. He sighed softly and muttered to himself, "According to Master Purin and Master Shinchen, it seems that a great calamity is coming in the cultivation world. Moreover, the Japanese have come to join in the fun. I really don't know what the situation will be like. What will happen to me and Chaner? What will happen to the Fox Zen school?" Thinking of this, Li Yundong felt that his thoughts were in a mess for a moment. He composed himself and slowly calmed down. He sat down cross-legged, then held the burning thumb pot with both hands and injected his jinqi into it, preparing to subdue this Buddhist magical item. At first, Li Yundong could feel that there was a powerful force resisting his jinqi in the burning thumb pot. He knew that this was the power of the burning thumb pot's own magical item. Li Yundong felt that this magical item had developed a strong resistance. He was not surprised but happy, because subduing a magical item was like training a horse. The more powerful the magical item was, the stronger its resistance was, and the harder it was to subdue it. Moreover, the methods of taming each magical item were different. Li Yundong cheered up and mobilized all the jinqi in his body to inject into the burning thumb pot. As he injected more and more jinqi, the resistance of the burning thumb pot became weaker and weaker. But when this resistance was about to disappear, Li Yundong suddenly felt a huge and unparalleled force pouncing on him. Before Li Yundong could even react, this force was like an overwhelming tsunami, instantly engulfing his entire divine sense and plunging him into the boundless darkness. I just came back from Shanghai. I need to hurry up and finish this chapter. To quickly find this website, please search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Chapter 453. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Cultivation was as difficult as ascending to heaven. Cultivation was like ascending to heaven. It was like stepping on an invisible and rugged road to heaven. The higher one's cultivation, the more miserable it would be when one day he slipped and fell. Therefore, the greater the cultivator, the more careful and cautious he would be when cultivating. He was afraid that if he took a wrong step, he would fall into a bottomless abyss and be doomed eternally. Mortals who had not yet heard the way wanted to cultivate. They had to firm their beliefs, painstakingly pursue the true way between heaven and earth, and painstakingly find a true master who could guide them. As for those rookie cultivators who had heard the way, if they wanted to cultivate further, they had to solve the big problem of wealth. Even if they solved the big problem of wealth, they had to continue to solve the two big problems of partner and mansion. Even if all of the above were solved, they still had to face the many magic items in the world. Each magic item had its own unique attributes and characteristics, and the methods of subduing them were also different. Before, Li Yundong had subdued the fan of 7 treasures and the Lyoha smoothly. It could be said that he had done it in one go, so he had also relaxed his vigilance about subduing magic items. After all, he had only cultivated for a short time, and when he was subduing magic items, he didn't have Zi Yuan, who had rich cultivation experience, to give him advice. He didn't know what kind of situation he would encounter when subduing a famous Buddhist magic item like the burning thumb pot. The burning thumb pot was the personal magic item of the famous Buddhist monk Fa Hai. Although Fa Hai had passed away and left this magic item to his descendants, it had not always been in a state of no use. There were countless famous monks who had used the burning thumb pot to subdue demons. Among them, the most famous user was Master Haidang, born in the 28th year of the Guangxu dynasty in the Qing dynasty, whose original name was Fan Wubing. After Master Haidang had passed away in 1989, this Buddhist magic item had wandered into the world and finally fell into the hands of Du Fei of the Chuanjian sect. It had only been more than 20 years since 1989, and the powerful jinqi in the magic item had not dissipated much. Moreover, there was a big difference between this burning thumb pot and the fan of 7 treasures. That was the psychic fan of 7 treasures had never been used since the death of Tang Xianzong. Therefore, the power of this Buddhist magic item had always been in a state of decline. However, the burning thumb pot was different. It had been used by Fa Hai for more than 30 years. Fa Hai's powerful and vigorous Buddhist power alone had protected it for more than 30 years. Coupled with the close protection and use of the famous monks of the past, the Buddhist power of this celestial device had not weakened. Instead, it had become stronger with each generation. Every generation of famous monks had left their mark on the burning thumb pot to test the next user, so as to prevent the burning thumb pot from falling into the hands of evil people. Secondly, the burning thumb pot was made of colored glass, and colored glass was a Buddhist magic item. It was clear inside and outside, pure and flawless. Therefore, in order to subdue such a pure magic item, the cultivator must first be clear inside and outside, pure and flawless. Otherwise, it would cause the rebound of the Jinchi mark left by the eminent monks of the burning thumb pot, which would launch a fierce counterattack. When Li Yundong had talked with Master Purin and Master Xincheng in Shiyuan Temple, he had already had lingering doubts in his heart. In addition, after coming out, he had encountered the rampant Japanese, which had increased the anger and hostility in Li Yundong's heart. Although Li Yundong had held his breath and calmed his mind before entering meditation, these negative emotions in the depths of his mind had not been driven out. In such a situation, he had subdued the burning thumb pot, and the hostility and anger in his body had been detected by the burning thumb pot. Thus, it had determined that Li Yundong was a hateful and violent villain. The Jinchi mark of the eminent monks of the past had begun to fiercely counterattack, pulling Li Yundong's divine sense into the spirit space of the burning thumb pot. Although Li Yundong was in meditation at this time, his divine sense was extremely clear. He could feel that he was in a boundless dark world. He seemed to be in a vast and boundless illusory world. The whole world did not exist, and even he did not exist. The world was empty, and so was he. His physical body was empty, and so was his Jinchi. It was as if there was only an illusory and empty soul left. However, in this situation where everything was empty, he could still feel the existence of his divine sense. No matter what he did, he could not get rid of this situation. This situation really shocked and frightened Li Yundong. He suddenly remembered what Su Chan had once said, there are three great horrors in cultivation. They are the great horrors between life and death, the great horrors between heaven and earth, and the great horrors between reality and illusion. Li Yundong had more or less experienced these three horrors. He had thought that after he had experienced them, they would no longer appear to bother him. However, he had not expected that these three horrors were the common demons of all cultivators in the world since ancient times. Countless cultivators had fallen under these three horrors. As long as they relaxed a little, these three horrors would take advantage of their weakness and make them fall into chi deviation. These high and mighty cultivators would fall into the mortal world and become trash that was inferior to even ordinary people in the mud. When Li Yundong had first reached the Zhuji phase, he had encountered such a great horrors between reality and illusion. At this time, his divine sense had been dragged into the spirit space of the burning thumb pot. It was as if his divine sense had been imprisoned in another vast universe. Not only could Li Yundong not distinguish between reality and illusion, but he also could not break free from this realm of nothingness. He was like a tiny speck of dust, floating endlessly in this vast and boundless universe. No one knew when he would reach the other side and when he would be able to break free. While Li Yundong was trapped in this empty world, Su Chan returned to her room. The little girl was lying on the bed, tossing and turning. Her extremely beautiful eyes were wide open, and her heart was heavy with worries. The little girl had been thinking about what had happened in the tea house. She repeatedly told herself, when Yundong subdues the burning thumb pot, I will tell him about it. But what if Yundong gets angry at that time? What if he dislikes me? He gave me the tea house, but I still caused such trouble for him. Can I not tell him? It seems that he didn't come to make trouble for me. The little girl struggled in her heart and tossed and turned in bed all night. It was not until dawn that she fell into a deep sleep. After dawn, the noises of the little foxes rang out in the living room, and the little girl woke up in a daze. After Su Chan got up, she raised her head and yawned. Then, wearing a long pajamas and a pair of slippers, she walked to Li Yundong's room with sleepy eyes. The little girl had been thinking about the problem before she went to bed last night in her dreams. Now she finally couldn't help it. She got up and went to find Li Yundong. As she walked, she muttered, "No, I have to tell Yundong about this as soon as possible, or it will torture me to death." Su Chan walked to the door of Li Yundong's room. She first tilted her head to listen to the situation in the room, but there was no sound, not even the slightest movement. Su Chan was slightly stunned and thought, is Yundong sleeping or subduing a powerful magical weapon? She looked at the sky and thought, it's already past 8 o'clock in the morning. It can't be that he hasn't finished the whole night, right? The little girl thought for a moment, then tentatively knocked on the door and called out weakly, "Yundong, are you there?" But her call was like a stone sinking into the sea, and there was no response. Su Chan said in surprise, "No way. If he was sleeping, he should have woken up with this call." The sleep of cultivators was very light, and it was only to meet the need of rest for their body functions. A little shout would wake them up immediately. Su Chan thought for a moment and said, could it be that he's really subduing the burning thumb pot? If he's really subduing the burning thumb pot, then I can't disturb Yundong. What if he goes crazy? With that thought in mind, she quietly left Li Yundong's room and walked into the bathroom with a frown on her face. When she saw herself in the mirror, her hair was a little messy and fluffy. She ran her fingers through her hair anxiously. "Oh my God," she murmured. "I'm so upset." At this time, Li Yundong, who was drifting aimlessly in the world of nothingness, seemed to hear a familiar and soft voice calling his name from the other side of the distant world. Li Yundong's spirit was suddenly lifted. Like a person who had lost his backbone, he suddenly straightened his back and swam in the direction of the sound with all his might. However, in this vast spirit space, no matter how hard Li Yundong swam, he couldn't reach the other side. After an unknown period of time, Li Yundong stopped moving in despair. He looked at the thick and boundless darkness in front of him in horror and thought, no, I may never be able to swim to the other side like this. But he quickly thought, but I clearly heard Channer's voice on the other side. She must be there. How can I leave her alone? In this world, no one can stop me from separating from Channer. If Buddha blocks me, I will kill Buddha. If God blocks me, I will kill God. How can this small spirit space stop me? The obsession in Li Yunyang's heart suddenly rose, and all the Jinqi in his body seemed to suddenly appear in his body. He could feel that his illusory body had become tangible again. In an instant, he had transformed into the immovable Wisdom King with 3 heads and 6 arms. When he raised his hand, there was thunder, and lightning flashed. At this time, Li Yundong was struggling violently in the spirit space. At first, all the power he had vented was absorbed and swallowed up by the vast dark chaotic world. But as time went on, Li Yundong's anger became stronger and stronger. He seemed to have incarnated into a furious Wisdom King, and heaven and earth were trembling in his anger. Slowly, the spirit space began to shake. The originally lifeless dark and chaotic world began to have flowing wind, as if a dark and trapped eggshell had been shattered by Li Yunyang's power. Slowly, there was a gap, so the light from the outside world also penetrated in bit by bit. Li Yundong saw that there was more and more light around him, and he also struggled more and more crazily to vent his anger, as if he wanted to completely smash the cage that trapped him. But when he was about to smash this spirit space, Li Yundong suddenly heard a distant and dignified voice slowly coming. This voice sounded like the Buddha of the Western Nirvana realm speaking solemnly. What is cultivation? Li Yundong was stunned when he heard this voice. He stopped destroying the spirit space and looked around with his eyes wide open, as if he was looking for the direction of the voice. He said, cultivation is to cultivate the mind. The voice soon came from all directions again. Then what is cultivation? Li Yundong said impatiently, cultivation is to cultivate a fundamental heart that is not impatient, not angry, not happy, not greedy, and not angry. The voice said again, since you know what cultivation is, you should also know that your heart is full of obsession, and obsession is delusion. I can't let people with delusion go. Li Yundong couldn't help but say angrily, bullshit. Why do you people cultivate and pray to Buddha? Isn't it to become a Buddha one day? Isn't this kind of thought an obsession? Is this kind of obsession to become a Buddha also a delusion? The voice was silent for a while, and then said, Amitabha, you are right, but also wrong. But no matter what, you can continue to move forward and see how far you will go if you follow your obsession. After that, the voice didn't sound again. Li Yundong waited for a long time. Finally, he waved his fists and released the thunder and lightning in his hands toward the spirit space. With a loud bang, the dark spirit space was instantly smashed by Li Yundong. His eyes suddenly lit up, as if he had gone from a world of polar night to a world of polar day. Li Yundong narrowed his eyes slightly. After adapting to the dazzling light, he took a closer look. Li Yundong was shocked by what he saw. To quickly find this website, please search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Chapter 454. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu frowny face Sanlian Literature website. In front of Li Yundong was a huge world. This world was so big that it was even bigger than the chaotic universe he had just been in. In the center of this world, there was an incomparably huge mountain. This mountain stood tall and majestic, connecting the heavens and the earth. The mountain stood on a black round wheel. Below the black round wheel was a golden round wheel. Below it was a red round wheel, and below it was a cyan round wheel. Outside this cyan round wheel was a vast void. The top and bottom of the mountain were large, but the center was small. A sun and moon hung on the mountainside at the same time. Beside the sun and moon, there were 4 skies that seemed to have been cut down, occupying the 4 sides of the mountainside. When Li Yundong saw this mountain, he was so shocked that he couldn't control himself. He suddenly thought of the Buddhist scriptures he had seen. He immediately remembered that the scene in front of him was recorded in the Buddhist scriptures. This mountain was Mount Meru, and these 4 skies were the 4 heavenly king heavens. Above the 4 heavenly king heavens were Haoli heavens, Yama heavens, Tusita heavens, Huala heavens, and free transformation heavens. Above them were the 18 heavens of the color realm and the 4 heavens of the colorless realm. At the root of Mount Meru, there were 7 layers of golden mountain and 7 layers of perfume sea, surrounding it. Each layer of sea was surrounded by a mountain. Outside the 7th layer of golden mountain was the alkali sea, and outside the alkali sea was the great Taiwei mountain. There were 4 major continents around the alkali sea, namely, the Dongxing Divine Continent, the Nanzhangbu Continent, the Aparagodania Continent, and the North Continent. They were called the 4 heavens. Beside each continent were 2 central continents, and hundreds of small continents were dependents. Li Yundong looked at the continents one by one and saw that there were 9 mountains and 8 seas in this world, 1 sun and 1 moon, for major continents, and 6 heavens. Li Yundong knew that this was the 3,000 great worlds mentioned in the Buddhist scriptures. While Li Yunyang was stunned, a dignified and solemn voice suddenly came from the sky of this world. Since you insist on your obsession, why don't you go to the trichiliocosm to find your true self and your obsession? As long as you can find your true obsession and your true self, you can get out of this world. After listening to the voice, Li Yundong's mind moved, and his body immediately turned into a long rainbow. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at the mountainside of Mount Meru. He looked up and saw that there were billions of creatures in the trichiliocosm, and he and Su Chan were in every world. Li Yundong was shocked and thought, there are 3,000 worlds and 10 billion mortal worlds. How can I find them? How can I get out? When Li Yundong smashed the chaotic world and came to the Trichiliocosm, he had no idea that he had been drawn into the spirit space of the burning thumb pot for a full day and night. In the evening, the little foxes, who had slaughtered a whole day's worth of customers from the tea house, returned home happily. The little foxes were still carelessly counting their gains for the day. They had no idea that their sect leader had been trapped in the spirit space of the magic treasure. It wasn't until the little foxes were hungry that they remembered something. Why hasn't the leader cooked yet? A little fox rubbed her stomach and shouted, "Madam, I'm starving. When will we eat?" At this time, Ling Yu suddenly had an idea and said to Su Chan, "By the way, Su. Madam, hurry up and ask the leader how to deal with the money. It would be great if it was like yesterday." Su Chan also felt very strange in her heart. She had never seen Li Yundong stay in his room all day without coming out. The little girl answered, stood up, and walked upstairs to the door of Li Yundong's room. She gently knocked on the door and asked tentatively, "Yundong, are you in there?" But after knocking for a while, there was still no response. Su Chan thought to herself, did he go out? The longer Li Yundong had been the leader of the Fox Zen school, the more dignified he had become. No one dared to open his door without permission. Only Su Chan, who had a special relationship with Li Yundong, dared to open the door and take a look. After Su Chan pushed the door open, she carefully poked her head in through the crack of the door. She glanced around the room and was immediately shocked. She saw Li Yundong sitting cross-legged on the floor of the room, holding the burning thumb pot in his hand. His whole body was soaked, and the expression on his face was changing. Sometimes he gritted his teeth, and sometimes he looked sad. Su Chan was shocked. She knew that this was a sign of Qigong deviation. She quickly opened the door and rushed toward Li Yundong. But when the little girl was about to touch Li Yundong, she immediately stopped. She knew that Li Yundong was in Qigong deviation at this time. If she rashly touched him, she would definitely harm him. Su Chan was so anxious that she was pacing around in circles, at a loss. At this time, Ling Yu, who had been waiting impatiently downstairs, came to the door and took a look inside. When she saw it, she suddenly exclaimed, "Oh no, the leader is in Qigong deviation." This shout was terrible. The little foxes downstairs suddenly panicked and rushed upstairs to see what was going on. Su Chan saw that they were rushing up like a swarm of 1,000 sparrows, chirping non-stop. She was afraid that they would disturb Li Yundong, so she immediately turned around and glared at them, which was rare for her. She said sternly, "Why are you making so much noise? Be quiet." The little foxes were used to playing with Su Chan, so they had never seen her so angry. Especially at this time, when they saw the fierce look in Su Chan's eyes, the little foxes were so scared that they didn't dare to speak again. At this moment, the little foxes clearly noticed one thing: although Su Chan was usually playful, innocent, and kind, if it was related to Li Yundong, she could also be ruthless. Su Chan's fierceness was only for a moment. After stabilizing the situation, she quickly returned to her usual self. The little girl knew that at this time, Zhou Qin had gone out to build the Zhuji phase, and Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling were accompanying her. As the leader, Li Yundong was in the predicament of Qigong deviation. Except for the two remaining Shirbas, Zhuang Yiting and Lu Yuehong, there was no one in the whole Fox Zen school who could make decisions. Su Chan subconsciously thought of her Shirbua. She drove the little foxes out of the door and carefully closed the door of Li Yundong's room. She asked anxiously, "Where are Shirbua Zhuang Yiting and Shirbua Lu Yuehong? They may be able to help. Go and find them." Some of the little foxes immediately ran to Zhuang Yiting and Lu Yuehong's room. They didn't knock on the door and pushed it open, but as soon as they entered, they came out disappointed. They're not here. Su Chan's heart skipped a beat. They're not here. The little foxes nodded at the same time. No. Su Chan couldn't help frowning. Where are they at this time? Why isn't anyone here? Ling Yu also stamped her feet and said, I'm so worried. What's wrong with the leader? What should we do? At this time, all the people who could make decisions were gone, and the little foxes all looked at Su Chan. When Su Chan saw them looking at her, she suddenly felt the pressure increase, but she knew that in the current situation, she couldn't shirk her responsibility like she had in the tea house. Su Chan took a deep breath, and her charming face showed an unprecedented calmness. She said, Don't worry, everyone. At present, Yundong is very likely to have failed in the process of subduing the magical item, and his divine sense is trapped in it. At this time, none of us can help him. We can only wait quietly for him to break out of the trap. At this time, what we have to do is take good care of ourselves, don't cause trouble for Yundong, and don't disturb him. The little foxes all looked at Su Chan eagerly, as if they felt that this little girl, who was usually carefree, had grown up a lot. She actually had the demeanor of a real boss in her speech and behavior, and she could control the situation. The little foxes all felt that Su Chan's words were reasonable and nodded one after another. Ling Yu frowned and sighed softly. Why is our Fox Zen school so troubled? It's not easy for us to have a good leader, but we've encountered such a dangerous thing. I really hope that the leader can get through this without any danger. If he can really get through this, I will eat vegetarian food and pray to Buddha every day in the future. As soon as she said this, the other little foxes also agreed in unison, yes, if the leader can get through this, we will also offer incense to Buddha. Su Chan forced a smile and said, What's the use of thanking Buddha after he's saved? This is worse than making a last-minute effort. As she said this, she knelt down, put her palms together, faced the west, and murmured, Buddha, Buddha, the Grand Master of our Fox Zen school, Pan Shi, was enlightened by Zen Master Baizhang and became an immortal. Our sect has some fate with Buddhism. For the sake of this little bit of fate, please save Yundong. From now on, Su Chan will continue to worship Buddha. After that, the little girl's pretty face was full of sincerity and solemnity. She put her palms together and recited the Great Compassion Mantra. Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva said, World-honored one, if all living beings recite the Great Compassion Mantra and fall into the three evil paths, I swear that I will not be enlightened and recite the Great Compassion Mantra. If all living beings are not born in the Buddhist kingdom, I swear that I will not be enlightened and recite the Great Compassion Mantra. If all living beings are not born in the Buddhist kingdom, I swear that I will not be enlightened and recite the Great Compassion Mantra. If all living beings are not born in Samadhi, I swear that I will not be enlightened. The little foxes next to her were infected by Su Chan's piety. They all knelt down beside her, put their palms together, and chanted the Great Compassion Mantra in unison. For a moment, the solemn chanting echoed in the luxurious and modern living room. It came from the open balcony window next to the living room and drifted far away, lingering for a long time. The chanting went on for the whole night. It wasn't until dawn the next day that Su Chan slowly opened her eyes and stopped chanting the scriptures. She looked back and saw that the little foxes had fallen asleep in the living room. It was obvious that they were tired after chanting all night and had fallen asleep one after another. Su Chan got up carefully without disturbing them. She carefully went to Li Yundong's room, opened the door, and took a look. She saw that Li Yundong's expression was still changing, but he was no longer sweating. It could be seen that the jinqi in his body had slowly calmed down and was no longer rushing as fiercely as before. Su Chan put her palms together in surprise and sighed silently in her heart, thanked Buddha for his blessing. Yundong's situation has not worsened. It seems that chanting sutras is still useful. Today, I will recite sutras for Yundong all night. Thinking of this, the little girl didn't feel tired. Instead, she felt refreshed and her heart was full of enthusiasm and motivation. In the little girl's opinion, as long as she continued chanting sutras like this, Yundong would break out of seclusion sooner or later. But what Su Chan didn't know was that Li Yundong had been trapped for a full 18 days. To quickly find this website, please search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. Chapter 455. Please remember the domain name of this site. Or search on Baidu, Sanlian Literature website. While Li Yundong was trapped in the tracheocosm, Zhou Qin, who had been trudging all the way, finally entered Tibet. Although Zhou Qin had followed the route that Li Yundong had taken to the west, by the time she entered Tibet, the route had already deviated. Li Yundong had set out from Tiannan City and finally arrived at the Bilonggu area of Baiyu County in western Sichuan. He had entered Tibet from the Kathuo Temple, while Zhou Qin had entered the Zhuji Phase area from the Kashan area of Langkazi County in Shannan, Tibet. Along the way, Zhou Qin's shoes had 2 holes in them. At this time, her walking shoes had 2 holes in the front, and the soles were almost worn flat. At this time, she was wearing a dark gray long-sleeved casual dress with a pair of straight trousers. This young lady was carrying a bag. Although her clothes were a little messy, Zhou Qin was still very clean. Especially at this time, her qi and blood were incredibly strong. At this time, the Qinghai, Tibet plateau was already covered in silver, but she was wearing a thin shirt and trousers. Her pretty face looked white and rosy, and her skin was so delicate that it could be broken by the wind. Even though she was covered in dust, it still could not hide her beauty. In the cold winter of Tibet, Zhou Qin rarely saw pedestrians along the way. Occasionally, she would see Tibetans slowly coming all the way in yak carts. They were all wearing cotton-padded jackets and trousers, wrapped tightly to resist the cold and harsh winter. These Tibetans saw that Zhou Qin was wearing a thin shirt and trousers. Her slim figure was as weak as a winter sweet in the cold wind, as if she would freeze in the next second. They all looked at Zhou Qin in surprise. Some Tibetans kindly took out warm cotton-padded clothes from their carts and were about to hand them to Zhou Qin, but they saw that this extremely beautiful and slim woman had already walked far away. They watched as Zhou Qin walked into the extremely cold snow field of the Qinghai, Tibet plateau in a thin shirt and headed for Kari Holy Mountain. Her speed was simply not that of a mortal. They all turned over and got out of the car in shock. Looking at Zhou Qin's disappearing figure, they murmured and worshipped her. Zhou Qin had trudged all the way here, and she had suffered much more than what Li Yundong had suffered at the beginning. At this time, her temperament had changed dramatically. In the past, Zhou Qin gave people a feeling of indifference, reservation, pride, and conceit. She was like a noble and proud swan that people could not get close to. After a long journey, the qi in her body had been refined thousands of times, condensing like molten steel. When it surged, it was as vigorous and blazing as lava. When it solidified, it was as hard and indestructible as pig iron. There was an indomitable fortitude between her eyebrows, like a peerless sword that was about to be unsheathed and would ring at any time. Wan Hongling and Zi Yuan, who had been following Zhou Qin from afar along the way, were both staring at Zhou Qin. Although they had not observed Zhou Qin up close, they could feel that the powerful energy contained in Zhou Qin's body was no less than that of Li Yunyang. At this time, Zhou Qin had not yet reached the Zhuji phase, so she did not know how to hide or restrain her strength. Therefore, wherever she went, there were thick clouds above her head. There seemed to be a pair of majestic eyes hidden in the clouds, staring at her every move. Wan Hongling looked at Zhou Qin's figure and couldn't help but sigh. I didn't expect her to persist all the way. It's incredible. I saw her crying secretly at night a few times. At that time, I thought she would give up, but I didn't expect that she would insist on going on the road again the next day. For a daughter of a rich family like her, this is really rare. Amazing, really amazing. Zi Yuan also sighed with a smile. Yes, the fragrance of plum blossoms comes from the bitter cold, and the edge of the sword is sharpened. This sword is about to be sharpened to the world. Wan Hongling looked at Zhou Qin enviously. I really envy her. She is a good furnace, a good opportunity, a good master, good luck, and a good temperament. She was born to be a cultivator. However, Zi Yuan shook her head slightly and said solemnly to Wan Hongling, No, Hongling, no one in this world is born to cultivate. If Zhou Qin did not have this perseverance, it would have been impossible for her to persist on the road to Zhuji phase. Even you have not experienced the arduous cultivation of trekking 2,000 kilometers to Tibet. Wan Hongling snorted and said with some dissatisfaction, If I wanted Renyuan Jindan, I could do it too. Zi Yuan glared at Wan Hongling and was about to scold her when she suddenly saw Wan Hongling's eyes widen. She pointed to Zhou Qin's voice in the distance and said, Look, what's wrong with her? Zi Yuan looked in the direction of her finger and saw that at this time, Zhou Qin was standing in the endless snowfield like a statue, motionless. After a long time, her body moved slightly, as if she had reluctantly sat down cross-legged. As soon as she sat down, she seemed to have entered a meditative state and was motionless. Wan Hongling said in surprise, Is she going to Zhuji phase now? Zi Yuan frowned. She bit her lip gently and said in a deep voice, Damn it, Zhou Qin is a Xianin virgin furnace. There is Xianin qi and Yuanyang qi in her body. She is also a reconstructed body of Jindan. It can be said that she has the most perfect cultivation conditions in cultivation, but she doesn't know how to control her qi. At this time, the qi in her body is boiling and uncontrollable, forcing her to build the Zhuji phase here. Wan Hongling smiled bitterly. No way. It's not easy to get to the foot of the holy mountain, and she's actually going to Zhuji phase. What's the difference between this and a pregnant woman who is about to go to the hospital and her water breaking? Zi Yuan found Wan Hongling's analogy interesting. She couldn't help but smile bitterly and say, Although your words are a little vulgar, the analogy is very appropriate. For us cultivators, Zhuji phase is indeed like giving birth to a child. Ordinary people give birth to children, but we produce Naiden in our dantian. Moreover, you don't know when Naiden will suddenly jump out. Wan Hongling asked Zi Yuan, What should we do now? It's not a good thing for Zhou Qin to build the Zhuji phase on this vast plateau. What if someone suddenly comes and disturbs her at this time? Zi Yuan sighed helplessly. We can only protect her from being attacked by bad people along the way, but we can't interfere with her cultivation. Even if she fails to build the Zhuji phase, we can't interfere. Otherwise, once she understands that someone will protect her on the way to the Zhuji phase, she will subconsciously develop a sense of dependence. Once a cultivator develops this kind of dependence, she will be crippled. She will never be able to build the Zhuji phase again in this life. Wan Hongling was shocked. Then are we just going to watch her build the Zhuji phase here? Zi Yuan sighed and said, There's no other way. This is her fate. Let's see if she can succeed in building the Zhuji phase. Even if she fails, she can do it again. The two of them looked at Zhou Qin worriedly. Although they were not very close to Zhou Qin, they had seen her struggle along the way, and they didn't want her to fail at this last moment. At this time, Zhou Qin's heart was also full of helplessness. She had wanted to climb to the mountainside of the snowy mountain in front of her and build the Zhuji phase like Li Yundong. But she hadn't expected that as soon as she climbed the vast snowy plateau, she would feel her heart open up. The aura all over her body seemed to be drawn by the qi of heaven and earth, surging uncontrollably and fiercely. At first, Zhou Qin didn't pay much attention, but as she ran further, the aura in her body became more and more intense. In the end, Zhou Qin clearly felt that the aura all over her body was like a big vortex, crazily rushing toward the lower dantian of her lower abdomen. It was as if there was an extra whirlpool there, and the center of the whirlpool was the place where Niden was about to be formed. Although the environment was not good at this time, Zhou Qin did not dare to hold on anymore. She knew that if she did, all the meridians in her body would explode. She did not dare to be careless. She immediately sat down cross-legged and fell into a deep meditation. Just as Zhou Qin was in meditation, it suddenly began to snow. The flying snow on the Qinghai, Tibet plateau was as big as a goose feather. In just a short while, Zhou Qin's body seemed to be covered with a thick layer of white felt. But at this time, the aura in Zhou Qin's body was flowing. A stream of cold Xianing qi rushed from her left kidney to her lower dantian, and another stream of hot Yuanyang qi rushed from her right kidney to her lower dantian. When the two auras collided, they immediately vibrated and rubbed against each other, producing a blazing aura. Gradually, Zhou Qin could feel that this aura was getting stronger and hotter. There seemed to be an invisible fireball rolling quickly in her lower abdomen. The heat continued to evaporate and quickly melted the snow on Zhou Qin's body. However, when the snow turned into water and slid down her body, new flying snow covered it again. In this way, the snow melted and piled up repeatedly. Soon, a thin layer of ice formed on Zhou Qin's body, and her whole body was like a sculpture covered in ice armor. Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling in the distance were worried. Zi Yuan frowned and said, "Oh no, Zhou Qin should find a place to take shelter from the wind and snow. The true fire in her body is too strong, and it is constantly melting the snow, causing the cold qi to penetrate her body through her pores. Even if she can successfully build the Zhuji phase, there will be a lot of moisture and cold qi left, which will be detrimental to her future cultivation. Building the Zhuji phase like this is not worth it." Ruan Hongling was also worried and said, "Sister Zi Yuan, shall we go and interrupt her Zhuji phase? I'd rather let her fail this time than leave a root of her illness." "No. I'd rather leave a root of her illness than let her develop a dependence from now on." Zi Yuan gritted her teeth and shouted resolutely, "It's easy to cure external diseases, but difficult to cure internal diseases." Ruan Hongling looked at Zhou Qin and sighed with a wry smile. "I originally thought that this girl had always been lucky, but I didn't expect such a thing to happen at such a critical moment. Alas!" While she was sighing with emotion, she suddenly heard a melodious and sweet song coming from the white snowfield. "First, it's best not to see each other, so that we won't fall in love. Second, it's best not to know each other, so that we won't miss each other. Third, it's best not to accompany each other, so that we won't owe each other anything. Fourth, it's best not to cherish each other, so that we won't remember each other. Fifth, it's best not to love each other, so that we won't abandon each other." This song was sung by a woman. Her voice was clear and melodious like a silver bell, and it was beautiful like the flowing water at the foot of the Tangula Mountains. Especially this song revealed a strand of dense yearning and pain of yearning, and it was melancholic and sorrowful, causing the hearts of those who heard it to fluctuate and be moved. Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling hadn't expected that such a moving song would suddenly come from the vast snowfield of Qinghai Tibet. They suddenly felt as if a thin string had been gently plucked in their hearts, and they were a little dazed for a moment. Especially Zi Yuan. For some reason, Li Yundong's figure suddenly appeared in her mind, which made her heart tremble slightly for a moment. For a moment, the world was extremely quiet. Only this beautiful voice came through the howling wind and snow. This song seemed to represent the purest and most beautiful thing in the world, and even the merciless wind and snow could not stop it. The two young women looked into the distance at the same time, as if they wanted to see clearly who was singing such a sorrowful and moving song, and who was tugging at the strings of their hearts. To quickly find this site, please search on Baidu, Sonlian Literature website. Chapter 456. Go to Kanwan. Heavy snowflakes fluttered in the boundless sky. The world seemed to be boundless. In this boundless snowfield, a team slowly walked out. Go to Kanwan. Most of the team was made up of wooden carts pulled by yaks and extremely cold-resistant highland horses. Some of the Tibetans in Tibetan clothes had wrapped themselves tightly, leaving only a pair of eyes exposed. Some old Tibetans were sitting on wooden carts pulled by yaks, turning the prayer wheel and walking slowly all the way. In this team, there was a girl riding on a yak. Although the snowstorm was very heavy at this time, she was still singing to her heart's content, as if she wanted the wind and snow to send her voice far, far away, all the way to the ears of her lover, bringing her pain of longing and lovesickness. None of the Tibetans in this team spoke. They all seemed to be quietly listening to the girl's singing. Everyone's face was full of emotion and remembrance, as if they were recalling their own emotional memories. When the team was not far from Zhou Qin, the leading Tibetan suddenly shouted, "Chambajila, look, look! There seems to be someone." The leading Tibetan was Uncle Chambajila, who Li Yundong had saved when he was in the Zhuji phase. At this time, he was returning from the Kari Holy Mountain with his clansmen, but they met Li Yundong's disciple, Zhou Qin, on the way back. When Chambajila heard the shouts of his clansmen, he took a closer look and saw a figure sitting cross-legged on the side of the road. Her whole body was frozen and she was motionless. Chambajila sighed softly and said, "I'm afraid she's frozen to death." By the time he had finished speaking, the girl who was singing had already stopped singing. She spurred her horse to stand in front of Chambajila. Her delicate face was full of sorrow, and there was a touch of haggardness in her big, watery eyes. The girl was Meiduo. She asked softly, "Chambajila, what's wrong?" Chambajila raised his horsewhip, pointed at Zhou Qin on the side of the road, and sighed. "Poor thing, she's frozen to death." As he spoke, he turned around and shouted at his clansmen, "Go and carry him into the carriage. When the snow stops, we'll find a good place to bury him." Meiduo curiously looked at the frozen passerby by the roadside. She saw that the passerby was dressed differently from the Tibetans. He looked like a Han from the mainland. Ever since Meiduo had met Li Yundong and fallen in love with him, she had developed a special affection for the Han people. She grabbed Chambajila and whispered, "Chambajila, let me go. Maybe this Han brother is not dead yet." Chambajila looked at Meiduo. He seemed to know what she was thinking, so he couldn't help but sigh to himself. He thought to himself, "Are you kidding me? In this world of ice and snow, wearing such little clothes can freeze people to death in less than 5 minutes, let alone with such a thick layer of ice all over her body." However, Chambajila still stopped Meiduo and said, "Well, Meiduo, go and have a look. But be careful not to touch the ice with your hands, or you'll freeze." Meiduo smiled slightly and said, "Chambajila, I know. I'm not a child anymore." Chambajila looked at Meiduo and couldn't help but sigh in a low voice. "Alas, you are indeed not a child. Our Meiduo's heart is no longer in the snow mountain." Meiduo rode her horse forward to Zhou Qin's side. She jumped down gently and bent down to take a look. What she saw shocked her. She saw that the person wearing a layer of ice armor turned out to be a beautiful Han sister. What surprised her even more was that although this woman's whole body had been frozen, her cheeks were still rosy. This Han sister is really still alive? Meiduo was shocked. She subconsciously reached out and gently probed the woman's nose. However, she found that the woman was not breathing at all. Meiduo couldn't help but be confused again. She thought to herself, what's going on? If she's frozen to death, how can her face still be so rosy? But if she's still alive, why isn't she breathing? Not far away, Changbajila saw that Meiduo was staring at Zhou Qin in a daze and didn't respond. He couldn't help shouting, "Meiduo, what's going on?" Meiduo turned her face and shouted, "Changbajila, I don't know either. This Han sister doesn't seem to be dead, but she seems to be dead again." Changbajila couldn't help laughing. "Meiduo, you silly child. How can a person seem to be dead and not dead at the same time? If she's dead, she's dead. If she's not dead, she's not dead." With a strange look on her face, Meiduo shouted, "Changbajila, come and see for yourself." Changbajila smiled and shook his head. He spurred his horse forward, turned over, and took a look. Even though he was experienced and knowledgeable, he couldn't help but be shocked. He exclaimed, "This is really strange." Changbajila also probed Zhou Qin's nose with his hand and became even more shocked. "What's going on? Why is her face obviously rosy, but she's not breathing?" Meiduo looked at Zhou Qin curiously. She stared intently for a while and found that the blood vessels under the delicate white skin of Zhou Qin's neck seemed to be moving slightly. Meiduo suddenly exclaimed, "She's still alive. I can see her blood vessels beating." After that, Meiduo reached out to touch Zhou Qin's face, as if she wanted to confirm her words. But as soon as Meiduo's hand touched Zhou Qin, her whole body shook. The powerful aura in Zhou Qin's body instantly poured into her body. Meiduo's whole body suddenly shook, just like how Zhou Qin had touched Li Yundong, who was in the process of building the Zhuji phase. She was pulled into Zhou Qin's spirit space. In a trance, Meiduo felt that she was in a bustling modern metropolis. She was like a bystander, looking through Zhou Qin's experience from childhood to adulthood, watching the growth of this rich girl bit by bit. Meiduo had watched Zhou Qin grow up from an eccentric and stubborn child to a proud and conceited young lady. She had also watched Zhou Qin meet Li Yundong on campus, who had confessed his love for her, and Zhou Qin had rejected him without any consideration for his feelings. At first, Meiduo had thought that Li Yundong, who had not yet obtained the Renyuan Jindan, looked familiar. She hadn't recognized that this loser, who had been a little fat before, was her Han brother. But when Meiduo saw Li Yundong, who had taken the Renyuan Jindan and had been reborn, she couldn't help but exclaim in her heart, "Ah, this is the Han brother. Why is he here? Does this Han sister also know the Han brother? Ah, by the way, the Han brother once told me that he used to love a girl deeply. Is this Han sister the girl he loved deeply? Is her name Su Chan?" For Meiduo, Su Chan was really an unforgettable name. It was for this girl that the Han brother had finally rejected her. With this question in mind, Meiduo continued to quietly watch the scenes that flashed quickly in Zhou Qin's spirit space. She looked at the bits and pieces of Li Yundong in the depths of Zhou Qin's memory. She watched as the boy was sometimes majestic and sometimes humorous. Sometimes, Meiduo admired and yearned for him. Sometimes, she was amused and giggled, trembling with laughter. It turns out that the Han brother is such an interesting person. Meiduo looked at everything in front of her with a smile on her face. She couldn't help but feel tenderness in her heart. She murmured in a daze, "I really envy this Han sister for being so happy with the Han brother." But soon, Meiduo discovered that in Zhou Qin's memory, there was always another girl by Li Yundong's side. This girl was extremely beautiful, so beautiful that even women were envious and jealous of her. She always snuggled up to Li Yundong like a little bird, incomparably affectionate. When Meiduo saw this, she couldn't help but wonder in her heart, is this Han sister not Su Chan? Is this extremely beautiful girl the Han sister? Soon, Meiduo saw Li Yundong mobilize heavenly thunder to strike young Master He angrily, especially when he said, "If heaven doesn't take you, I will." The girl's eyes were filled with tears, and she was so excited that she couldn't control herself. Meiduo bit her lip tightly and shouted crazily in her heart, this is a real hero, this is a real hero. This is the Han brother I love. But soon, when Meiduo saw that Li Yundong had no choice but to separate from Su Chan, she finally couldn't hold back the tears in her eyes. At this moment, she felt the love between Li Yundong and Su Chan. It was so deep that others couldn't even bear to break them up. It turns out that the Han brother also has such a tender side. Meiduo suddenly felt that she had come into contact with the real Li Yundong, a Li Yundong who was heroic and gentle at the same time. After an unknown period of time, Meiduo woke up from Zhou Qin's spirit space. When she came to her senses, she found that her clansmen were all surrounding her, looking at her in surprise and nervousness. Changbajila stared at Meiduo with his eyes wide open and asked tentatively, "Meiduo, are you okay?" Meiduo blinked and found that the corners of her eyes were cold. She raised her hand to wipe them, only to find that she had inadvertently burst into tears. The tears that flowed down her cheeks had quickly turned into sparkling ice crystals. Meiduo smiled and said to Changbajila, "I'm fine." Changbajila pointed to the frozen tears on Meiduo's face and asked in surprise, "Why were you crying just now?" Meiduo smiled and said, "Was I crying?" "Changbajila, you must have seen it wrong. I was smiling." The expression on Changbajila's face became even more strange. He asked, "Then what were you smiling about?" Meiduo smiled gently and said, I was smiling. I really have never missed a person in love. This Han brother is really worthy of love." Hearing this, Changbajila smiled bitterly in his heart. This Meiduo is really crazy. She is beyond cure. Her soul has been taken away by the Han brother. Even the living Buddha can't call her soul back now. Meiduo said in a daze, "Changbajila, I've decided. I'm going to Tiannan City to find him. I'm going to his school." Changbajila smiled bitterly and said, "Meiduo, you've said this to Shuashan Mountain and God of Heaven 10,000 times. What can you do even if you go to him? Don't tell me you want to separate him and his lover. Nothing. I just want to see him from a distance and I'll be very satisfied." Meiduo rolled her eyes and giggled. There was a different kind of brilliance between her eyebrows. At this moment, Zhou Qin faintly woke up and let out a cry. Meiduo was overjoyed and exclaimed, "Oh, Han's sister is awake." You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.